Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto saved Boa Hancock from celestial dragons and she made him the Emperor of Amazon Lily. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, An Unforgivable Act. The first sensation was a violent, wrenching tear. Not of flesh, but of reality itself. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was standing on the broken earth of the Valley of the End, the last vestiges of Kagaya's will dissipating into the wind, his hand clasped with Sasuke's. The next, he was falling through a silent, colorless void, a failed, desperate jutsu from a hidden enemy tearing a hole in the fabric of his world. There was no sound, no air, just an agonizing pull on his very soul. Then, light, sound, and smell crashed into him with the force of a physical blow. He hit the ground hard, his senses screaming in protest. The air was thick, cloying with salt and something else, a sweet, resinous scent that coated his tongue. Towering, impossibly large trees, their roots like colossal veins, snaked through the earth and reached for a sky that seemed too close. Strange, translucent bubbles drifted lazily past, some carrying people who stared down with idle curiosity. The ground itself was not dirt, but a patchwork of manicured grass and wooden planks that groaned under the weight of a bustling crowd. He pushed himself up, his orange and black jacket feeling strangely out of place. His senses, sharpened by the sage's power, were a curse here. They flooded him with a cacophony of information he couldn't process. The frantic heartbeats of thousands, the murmur of a language that was almost, but not quite, his own, the tang of cooked meats, the stink of unwashed bodies, the pervasive fear, that was the worst of it. It was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of the city, a cold dread that clung to everyone like a second skin. Naruto closed his eyes for a second, forcing his mind to filter the chaos. He wasn't in the elemental nations. That much was certain. The energy of this place was different. Thinner. The nature energy he could feel was vibrant, but it flowed strangely, as if following unfamiliar rules. He was an anomaly, a disruption in the local current. He started walking, his movements fluid and silent, a ghost in the midst of the throng. People gave him a wide berth, their eyes flicking to his whiskered cheeks and the strange symbols on his back, then quickly looking away. He saw things that made no sense. Men with metal arms, women with horns, a hulking figure with what looked like bare ears. He saw small, flying creatures delivering folded papers, and storefronts advertising life extension surgery next to signs for high-quality slaves. Slaves. The word hit him like a physical blow, colder and sharper than any kunai. He had fought a war to free the world from a forced, dreamlike servitude. The idea of people being bought and sold like cattle made a hot, familiar anger begin to coil in his gut. He pushed it down. He was alone, in a place he didn't understand. He needed information, not a fight. Not yet. His attention was drawn to a larger commotion up ahead, near a grove where the giant trees were thickest. A crowd had gathered, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound terror. They kept their distance from a central path, clearing a wide lane as if for royalty. But this wasn't the respectful silence he'd seen for a daimyo. This was the stillness of prey that knew a predator was near. Down that path walked a man. He was grotesquely round, his face a pasty mask of petulance. A glass-like bubble encased his head, and he wore the robes of a noble, but they were garish and ill-fitting. Two figures, a man and a woman, both looking utterly miserable, walked behind him on their hands and knees, connected by a chain. They were the source of the word he'd seen advertised. Slaves. Out of my way, commoner. Filth, the round man whined, his voice tinny and distorted by his helmet. A man in the crowd, a father holding his young daughter's hand, was a half-step too slow in retreating. The noble didn't break stride. He simply drew a golden, ornate pistol and fired. The crack of the gunshot was shockingly loud. The father cried out, clutching his shoulder as he fell, his daughter screaming in terror. The crowd didn't gasp. They didn't rush to help. They flinched back, their faces turning paler, their fear deepening into a collective, silent submission. They were used to this. Naruto stopped. The world seemed to narrow, the chaotic sounds fading into a dull roar. All he could see was the fallen man, the crying child, and the self-satisfied smirk on the round noble's face. He didn't know the rules of this world, the politics, the powers at play. He didn't care. Some lines were universal. You don't shoot a man in front of his child for being in your way. He felt a presence at his side. Another clone, one he had sent out to scout, dissipated, feeding him a stream of information. The round man was a celestial dragon, a world noble. Descendants of the world's creators. To harm one was to challenge the entire world's authority. It meant the arrival of an admiral, a military power so great that entire islands were erased. It was a threat designed to ensure absolute obedience. It meant nothing to him. Naruto's eyes, a deep, calm blue, shifted, a flicker of gold and a cross-slit pupil appearing for a barest fraction of a second. Sage mode activated, and the world snapped into perfect clarity. He could feel every racing heartbeat, every trembling muscle, every whispered prayer of the terrified onlookers. He could feel the arrogant, fluttering pulse of the celestial dragon, the exhausted, despairing rhythm of the two people crawling behind him, and the ragged, pained beat of the man on the ground. And he felt something else. A new presence had entered the grove. A group of women, warriors by their stance, stood near a shop with a sign that read, "Human Auctioning House." They radiated a dangerous confidence, but beneath it, Naruto's senses picked up a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of old, deep-seated trauma, reawakened by the sight of the celestial dragon. At their lead stood a woman of impossible beauty, her hair a fall of perfect black, her figure statuesque. She carried herself with an aura of absolute authority, her chin held high in a display of regal contempt for everyone and everything around her. Yet, Naruto could feel it in her, too. A tightly coiled serpent of fear and rage, hidden deep beneath the flawless marble of her composure. The celestial dragon, Saint Charlos, had noticed them. His piggy eyes widened with avarice. "Ooh! Look, Papa! Such fine-looking women! I want them! I want all of them!" He waddled towards the group, his slaves crawling miserably behind him. The tall, beautiful woman's eyes narrowed, a flash of pure hatred in their depths. "Get away from me, you pig," she said, her voice like Arctic ice. Charlo stopped, his jaw dropping in disbelief. No one spoke to him that way. What did you say to me, you wench? Do you know who I am? I'll buy you and your friends and make you my shoes." One of the women flanking the leader, a large woman with green hair, took a step forward. "You will not address Empress Hancock in such a manner." "Hancock?" Charlos's eyes lit up with malicious recognition. "Boa Hancock, the pirate empress? One of the 7 warlords of the sea. It doesn't matter. Your title means nothing to me. I want your sisters. The ones with the devil fruit powers. They'll make fine additions to my collection." He raised his pistol again, pointing it not at Hancock, but at the 2 women beside her, one immensely large, the other with serpentine features. The crowd collectively held its breath. Hancock's mask of arrogance didn't slip, but Naruto could feel the spike of panic in her, sharp and desperate. She was powerful, he could sense that, but she was paralyzed. The mere presence of this pathetic man held her in check. Attacking him was a line even she dared not cross. Naruto started to move. It wasn't a sprint. It was a cessation of being in one place and an immediate appearance in another. The air didn't even have time to whisper. One moment he was in the crowd, the next he was standing directly in front of the fallen father and his crying daughter, his back to them, facing the celestial dragon. Silence. The entire grove, the entire world, seemed to fall silent. St. Charlos blinked, his pistol still raised. The crowd stared, their eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly being replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. Boa Hancock's perfectly sculpted jaw went slack. Her sisters, Sandersonia and Marigold, looked as if they'd seen a ghost. Who the hell are you? Charlos stammered, his bravado faltering. You're in my way. Move, or I'll shoot you too. Naruto didn't answer. He slowly knelt, his back still to the noble. He placed a hand on the wounded man's shoulder. A soft, green glow, visible only to him, enveloped the wound. The bleeding stopped. The bullet, lodged deep in the muscle, was gently pushed out, clattering harmlessly to the ground. The torn flesh and sinew knitted back together. He took a small, folded pouch from his belt, full of soldier pills and rations, and pressed it into the man's hand. Get your daughter and go, Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that brooked no argument. Go now. The man stared, his mind unable to comprehend what had just happened. His shoulder, which had been burning with agony, felt whole. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing his daughter and melting into the crowd without a backward glance. Naruto stood up, his gaze finally settling on St. Charlos. For the first time, the celestial dragon felt a sensation entirely foreign to him, fear. It wasn't the respectful fear of his lessers. This was a primal, gut-wrenching dread. The man before him wasn't looking at him like a commoner looked at a god. He was looking at him like a man looks at an insect he is about to crush. You're a noisy one, aren't you? Naruto's voice was deceptively calm. Charlos's face contorted with rage, his fear momentarily forgotten. How dare you? How dare you speak to me? I am a descendant of the creators of this world. I am your god. I will have an admiral kill you. I will have your entire family enslaved for 1,000 generations. He aimed his pistol squarely at Naruto's forehead and pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed again. But Naruto didn't move. He hadn't even flinched. The bullet was simply gone. He'd caught it between his thumb and forefinger, the tiny piece of lead held casually as if it were a pebble. He let it drop. It tinkled on the wooden path. Gods don't bleed, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a low growl. And they certainly don't hide behind pieces of glass. Before Charlos could scream, Naruto was there. He moved past the speed of thought, a blur of orange and black. The two royal guards flanking the noble lunged forward, but they were children playing at war. A flick of Naruto's wrist sent a kunai spinning, not to kill, but to pin the sleeve of one guard's uniform to the bark of a mangrove root. A precise, open palm tap to the other guard's chest sent him crumpling to the ground, unconscious but unharmed. Then he was in front of Charlos. He reached out, his fingers wrapping not around the noble's throat, but around the rim of the glass bubble. With a sharp twist and a sound like cracking ice, he tore the helmet from Charlos's head and threw it aside. For the first time in his life, St. Charlos was breathing the same air as the commoners. He gasped, his eyes wide with panic, looking at the filthy air as if it were poison. Naruto's hand, glowing with a faint golden energy, shot forward. It wasn't a punch meant to maim or kill. It was a controlled, focused application of force, an extension of his will. His palm connected with Charlos's chest. There was no thunderous crack. No explosion. Just a dull thump and a whoosh of displaced air. St. Charlos's eyes bulged. His entire, massive body was lifted from the ground and sent flying backward, tumbling end over end like a discarded toy. He crashed through the front of the human auctioning house, the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass finally breaking the spell of silence. He landed in a heap amidst the wreckage, moaning and unconscious. The world remained still for a heartbeat. Then, pandemonium. People screamed. Not in fear, but in a strange, exhilarating terror. They ran, scattering in every direction, wanting to be as far away from this cataclysm as possible. In the history of the world government, for 800 years, no one had struck a celestial dragon. It was an act so unthinkable, so profoundly taboo, that it was tantamount to declaring war on the world itself. And this stranger had done it without a second's hesitation. Boa Hancock stood frozen, her mind reeling. Her fists were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She had spent her entire life, from the moment she had escaped that living hell, defined by her fear of those monsters. She had built an empire, become a warlord, and surrounded herself with the strongest warriors she knew, all to keep them at bay. Her arrogance, her cruelty, her refusal to let anyone get close, it was all a shield. A shield forged to protect herself from the memory of the brand on her back and the men who put it there. And this man, this complete stranger with whiskers on his cheeks and eyes as blue as the calmest sea, had just punched her nightmare in the face. He hadn't just defied a celestial dragon. He had treated him with the same casual disdain Charlos had shown the commoner. He had treated him like he was nothing. The sound of distant sirens began to wail, growing closer with alarming speed. "We have to go, Hebeheim." Marigold hissed, her composure finally breaking. "The Marines, an admiral will be here any second." Hancock didn't move. She couldn't take her eyes off Naruto. He stood calmly amidst the chaos he had created, his posture relaxed, his breathing even. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the empty grove before finally landing on her. There was no pride in his eyes, no arrogance. Just a quiet, unwavering certainty. Then the air grew heavy, and a lazy, almost bored voice drifted over the grove. "Oh, my. What a mess we have here. To strike a world noble, that's a very, very naughty thing to do." A figure coalesced from the light itself, resolving into a tall, thin man in a yellow and white pinstriped suit. He had a lazy, half-lidded expression on his face, as if he'd just been woken from a pleasant nap. Admiral Kizaru. Naruto's senses screamed a warning. The man wasn't just made of light, he was light. The nature energy around him warped, bending to his will. This was a level of power far beyond the guards or the pathetic noble. This was the real threat. "A celestial dragon has been assaulted," Kizaru said, his tone casual but his words carrying the absolute weight of his authority. "By law, I am here to dispense justice. Which means I have to execute you. It's a bother, but rules are rules." He raised a finger. A pinpoint of brilliant, blinding light formed at the tip. "Have you ever been kicked at the speed of light?" Before the question was even finished, his leg was already a blur of yellow energy, swinging in a devastating arc aimed at Naruto's head. To any normal observer, it was an attack that was impossible to see, let alone dodge. Naruto didn't dodge. He simply tilted his head. The beam of light that was Kizaru's leg shot past, missing by a millimeter. It continued on its path, striking one of the colossal mangrove roots a kilometer away. A deafening explosion erupted, vaporizing a section of the ancient tree the size of a warship. The ground shook, and debris rained down from the sky. Kizaru's lazy smile tightened by a fraction of a degree. He had reappeared a few dozen meters away, his hands in his pockets. "Oh. Good reflexes. You're not a normal one, are you?" Naruto's feet were planted, his body now humming with a visible golden aura. Nature energy poured into him, mixing with his own immense chakra reserves. The cross-slit pupils were now firmly fixed on the admiral. "You talk too much," Naruto stated. Kizaru chuckled. "Impatient. I hate dealing with impatient people. So troublesome." He raised his hands, and hundreds of particles of light began to coalesce around him. Yasukani no Magatama. A torrential rain of deadly light bullets shot towards Naruto, each one an explosive projectile capable of leveling a building. They were too many, too fast, a storm of pure energy that no living thing could withstand. Naruto didn't try to block them all. He didn't need to. A black, malleable sphere appeared in his hand. It shifted and flowed like liquid night, extending into a simple, elegant staff. A truth-seeking orb. An embodiment of the Sage of Six Paths power, capable of negating any ninjutsu. And as far as Naruto was concerned, this man's ability was just a flashy, high-level elemental jutsu. He spun the staff. It was not a frantic, defensive motion. It was a single, fluid arc, a black sliver of void cutting through the air. The storm of light particles crashed against it. There was no sound of impact. No explosion. The light simply vanished. Every single projectile that touched the black staff was utterly and completely nullified, erased from existence. From their hiding spot behind a thick root, Hancock and her sisters watched, their mouths agape. They had seen Kizaru's power before. It was absolute, undeniable. Nothing could touch him. Nothing could stop him. But this man was not only touching him, he was negating his power as if it were a parlor trick. Kizaru was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of careful neutrality, but Naruto could feel the shock rippling through him. The Admiral's heart rate had just skipped a beat. "That's new," Kizaru said, his voice losing some of its lazy drawl. "You're not a devil fruit user. That's not hockey. What are you? Does it matter?" Naruto took a step forward, the ground cracking slightly under his foot. He spun the staff once and held it ready. "You're here to dispense justice. So, let's get on with it." Kizaru went still. He was an admiral of the Navy. He was one of the 3 strongest individuals in the entire world government. He was a man who could destroy armies by himself. And he was standing in front of someone who had just effortlessly neutralized his signature attack, who had dodged a light-speed kick, and who was now looking at him not as an unbeatable force of nature, but as an obstacle. The reports of a strange energy signature from the void were clearly an understatement. This was not a pirate or a revolutionary. This was an unknown, an anomaly of terrifying power. His duty was to execute the man who struck a celestial dragon. But his other, more important duty was to protect the balance of the world and the stability of the world government. A full-scale battle with this creature, here and now, with its outcome uncertain, would cause catastrophic damage. It was an unacceptable risk. Kizaru let out a long, theatrical sigh. "You know, this is all far too much work. So much paperwork. I think I'll leave this to the fleet admiral to sort out." He began to dissolve into particles of light. "But don't get the wrong idea," his disembodied voice echoed. "The eyes of the world are on you now. There's nowhere you can run where we won't find you." And then he was gone. The oppressive weight of his presence vanished. The sirens fell silent. The grove was empty, save for Naruto and the Kuja warriors. The only sounds were the distant crackling of the burning mangrove and the unsteady breathing of Boa Hancock. Naruto's golden aura faded, his eyes returning to their normal blue. He let the truth-seeking orb staff dissolve back into a sphere, which hovered silently behind his shoulder. He stood there for a long moment, scanning the area, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Finally, he turned to face the pirate empress. He saw the disbelief, the shock, the dawning, terrifying hope in her eyes. He saw a woman who had been a queen for so long she'd forgotten what it was like to feel helpless, and who had just been reminded in the most jarring way possible. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice calm and even. Boa Hancock, the woman who had petrified legions of men with a single glance, who had never shown a moment of weakness to anyone, flinched. The question was so simple, so direct, so genuine. No one had asked her that in a very, very long time. She opened her mouth to deliver a scathing, arrogant retort. It was her armor, her weapon. But the words wouldn't come. They caught in her throat, choked by the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to shatter her composure entirely. All that came out was a strangled whisper. "Who? What are you?" Naruto offered a small, weary smile. It didn't quite reach his eyes. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. And I guess you could say I'm a little lost. Far away, in the heart of the world, on the holy land of Mary Geos, a message was being delivered. In a dark, opulent chamber, 5 elderly men sat, the shadows concealing their faces. The 5 elders, the highest authority of the world government. A den mushi on the central table rang, and a grim-faced marine officer relayed Kizaru's report. He neutralized the Yasukani no Magatama. Admiral Kizaru believes the subject's abilities are not derived from a devil fruit or any known form of haki. He nullified light itself. The admiral made a strategic withdrawal to avoid catastrophic collateral damage and an unpredictable engagement. One of the elders, a man with a long, white beard, steepled his fingers. A man who can harm a Logia user without haki. One who appears from nowhere and strikes a celestial dragon without fear or hesitation. His name? Uzumaki Naruto, he called himself. Another elder, the one with a sword across his lap, spoke, his voice like grinding stone. Uzumaki. A name associated with certain, troublesome lineages. But this power signature is entirely unknown. It is a dangerous variable. He is a threat to the balance, said a third. He must be eliminated. Immediately. Kizaru was right not to engage recklessly, the first elder countered. We know nothing. An unknown power of this magnitude, we must be cautious. We must understand it before we move to erase it. The 5 men sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the report settling over them. The world was built on a delicate balance of power, the 3 great powers. An unknown entity capable of challenging an admiral threw that entire balance into question. Finally, the man with the large birthmark on his forehead spoke. This information must be delivered. He must be made aware of this anomaly. The other 4 nodded in grim agreement. One of them rose and walked toward a massive, ornate door at the back of the chamber, a door that led to a place no one else was ever permitted to enter. He carried the report, his steps heavy. He was going to inform the true, unseen sovereign of the world. The one who sat upon the empty throne. In a hidden garden, under a sky that was not a sky, a solitary, silhouetted figure stood, delicately tending to a butterfly. The report was laid silently on a stone table. The figure paused, its head tilting slightly. It reached for the paper, its movements slow and ancient. As its fingers grazed the name, Uzumaki Naruto, the butterfly on its other hand suddenly crumbled to dust. An unseen, unfelt tremor passed through the very foundations of the world. A king had just noticed a new, unwanted piece on the board. Chapter 2, The Serpent Sanctuary. The silence in the wake of the admiral's departure was more deafening than the explosions had been. It was a vacuum, filled only by the crackle of distant flames and the ragged, unsteady breaths of the Kuja warriors. Naruto stood his ground, the last vestiges of golden sage energy receding from his form like a tide going out, leaving the calm blue of his eyes in its wake. He felt the gazes of the women on him, a mixture of awe, terror, and a profound confusion that was almost a palpable force. Boa Hancock was the epicenter of that storm. Her face, usually a mask of imperial disdain, was a fractured portrait of conflicting emotions. The fear she'd felt when Charlos threatened her sisters was still a cold knot in her stomach, but it was being rapidly overshadowed by the sheer, world-altering disbelief of what she had just witnessed. This man, this stranger, had not only done the unthinkable, he had faced down one of the world government's ultimate weapons and made him back down. He hadn't won through brute force, but through a display of power so absolute that the admiral, a man made of light, had deemed the fight not worth the effort. Hebeheim. Sandersonia, the serpentine sister, finally found her voice, a harsh whisper that cut through the stillness. The Marines will return. A buster call, they'll level this entire archipelago to get to him. We must leave. Marigold nodded, her formidable frame tense. She's right. Our ship is docked on the Western Grove. We can be in the calm belt before they mobilize. Hancock heard them, but her attention was fixed on Naruto. He had turned from the spot where Kizaru had vanished and was walking toward her, his stride unhurried, his posture relaxed. It was the walk of a man completely unworried by the hornet's nest he had just kicked. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze direct and unervingly clear. "She's right," Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm. "They'll be back, and they'll bring more than just one guy in a flashy suit. I'll get you home." It wasn't an offer. It was a statement of intent. The casual way he assumed responsibility for their safety, the simple declaration that he would see them to safety after causing an international incident of unprecedented scale, sent another tremor through Hancock's already reeling mind. For her entire life as Empress, she had been the protector, the one who made the decisions, the one who bore the burden of her people's safety. Now, this man was speaking as if that burden was his to carry. She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it. The Empress of the Kuja did not need a man's protection. But the words caught in her throat. The memory of her own paralysis in front of Charlos was too fresh, too raw. Her power, her title, her legendary beauty, none of it had mattered. She had been just as helpless as she was that day in the slave pens of Mary Gios. But he had not been. "Fine," she clipped out, the word sharp and brittle. She forced herself to turn, to reassert her command. "To the ship. Now." The Kuja warriors snapped out of their stupor, their training kicking in. They moved with fluid efficiency, melting back into the groves, their expressions still dazed but their movements purposeful. Hancock led the way, her sisters flanking her, her back ramrod straight. She could feel his presence behind her, a steady, warm anchor in the turbulent sea of her thoughts. She refused to look back. She refused to acknowledge the unnerving sense of security his proximity gave her. Their ship, the Perfume Yuta, was a marvel of Kuja engineering, a large vessel propelled not by sails but by two colossal, venomous sea serpents named Yuta. The moment they were aboard, the Kuja crew cast off the lines, and the great serpents pulled the ship away from the mangrove root with powerful, sinuous movements. As they cleared the grove, they could see marine vessels swarming the archipelago in the distance, a sight that would normally have sent a chill of dread through the crew. Today, it was a distant problem, dwarfed by the presence of the man standing calmly on their deck. The Kuja warriors gave Naruto a wide berth. They watched him with suspicious, hostile eyes, their hands never far from the snakes coiled around their waists that served as bows. A man. A man was on their sacred ship, heading for their sacred island. It was a violation of 1,000 years of law. But he was also the man who had humbled a celestial dragon and an admiral. They didn't know what to do, so they did nothing, their hostility a silent, tense wall. Naruto paid them no mind. His senses were stretched out, feeling the strange, lifeless quality of the water as they entered the calm belt. The wind died completely. The air grew still. Below the surface, he could feel massive presences, colossal life forms that dwarfed any summoning animal he had ever encountered. They were sea kings, the monsters that made this stretch of ocean impassable for most ships. But they gave the Perfume Yuta a wide berth, intimidated by the two even larger serpents pulling it. He walked to the rail, looking out at the still water. The world he knew was gone. His friends, his home, the life he had fought and bled for, all of it was a universe away. A profound sense of loss, one he had been holding at bay since he'd woken up on this strange island, washed over him. He was truly alone. "You seem troubled." He turned. Hancock stood several feet away, her arms crossed, her expression a careful mask of imperial curiosity. She had been observing him for hours, watching as he stood motionless at the rail, a solitary figure against the vast, empty sea. "Just thinking," Naruto said. "About the consequences of your actions," she asked, a hint of her usual sharp arrogance in her tone. "You have made an enemy of the entire world. There is no place for you to hide." Naruto met her gaze. "I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about home." The simple, honest answer disarmed her. She had expected bravado, or perhaps a fool's confidence. She had not expected a quiet, profound sadness. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. The man who could face down an admiral without flinching looked, just for a second, like a lost child. "This world is not your home, then," she stated. It wasn't a question. "No," he said, turning back to the sea. "It isn't." The admission hung in the air between them. It explained his ignorance of their customs, of the celestial dragons, of the admirals. He wasn't just a foreigner from some unknown island. He was, in a way she couldn't comprehend, an alien to their very reality. This fact, instead of making him seem weaker, made his actions on Sabaody even more profound. He had risked everything, had invited the wrath of a world he didn't even belong to, for a principle. To protect strangers. She found herself walking to the rail, standing a careful distance from him. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "Why did you interfere? You knew nothing of us. Nothing of the stakes." Naruto was silent for a moment, watching a distant sea king breach the surface before sinking back into the depths. "Some things don't need explaining," he said finally. "You don't let bullies hurt people. You don't let them treat others like they're worthless. It doesn't matter what world you're in. That's a line you don't cross." He turned his head, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "You knew that. I could feel it. You wanted to stop him just as much as I did." His words struck a chord deep within her. He saw it. He saw past her frozen facade to the rage and terror churning beneath. He didn't just see the pirate empress. He saw her. The revelation was as frightening as it was intoxicating. She quickly looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Do not presume to know my thoughts, man," she snapped, her defenses flying back up. "My reasons are my own." Naruto just gave a small, knowing smile and didn't press the issue. He had planted a seed, and he knew it. For the rest of the voyage, they didn't speak, but the silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken questions and a dawning, terrifying understanding. Their arrival at Amazon Lily was met with a fortress's welcome. The island rose from the sea like a giant green fawn, a single massive mountain carved into a city. As the perfume Yuta navigated the narrow channel toward the main port, figures appeared on the cliffsides. Hundreds of them. Kuja warriors, their bows drawn, hockey-infused arrows aimed directly at the ship, their killing intent a palpable wave that washed over the deck. "Halt!" a voice cried out, amplified by the natural acoustics of the bay. It was Elder Nyan, a tiny, elderly woman whose presence commanded more respect than any other on the island, save Hancock herself. She stood on a high precipice, her staff held firm. "Empress Hancock. What is the meaning of this? You have brought a man to the shores of Kuja." On the deck, the crew tensed. This was the ultimate taboo. Hancock's face was stone. She stepped to the prow of the ship, her voice ringing out with imperial power. "Stand down, all of you. This man is my guest. He is under my personal protection." "Protection?" Nyan's voice was sharp with disbelief. "You have brought the source of all our world's troubles to our one sanctuary. It is forbidden. The law is absolute. No man may set foot on this island. The law was born of a need to protect us from a world that would see us enslaved and used." Hancock retorted, her voice rising with passion. "This man stood against that world. He faced a celestial dragon and an admiral to protect my sisters and me. He is the reason we are not in chains at this very moment. His name is Naruto Uzumaki, and he will be treated with the respect he is." Ode. A stunned silence fell over the cliffs. The warriors looked at each other, their arrows still aimed but their certainty wavering. The Empress had never spoken with such fire about an outsider, let alone a man. Elder Nyan was silent for a long moment. "Bring him to the palace," she finally said, her voice heavy with grim resignation. The Empress has spoken. But let it be known that this day, 1,000 years of tradition has been broken. May the consequences not be our ruin. The arrows were lowered, but the hostility remained, thick and suffocating. As Naruto disembarked, walking the path up to the central palace, he felt thousands of eyes on him. It was a feeling he knew well. It was the same way the villagers of Konoha had looked at him as a child. A monster. A threat. A harbinger of destruction. The familiarity of it settled in his bones, not with fear, but with a weary resolve. He had changed their minds once before. He would do it again. The next few days were a test of patience. The Kuja warriors watched his every move. They saw him not as a guest, but as a prisoner awaiting judgment. He was given chambers, food, and water, but the unspoken threat was ever present. He knew they were testing him, waiting for him to reveal his true, male, nature. The first test was direct. A tall, confident warrior with dark hair, one of the leaders of the Kuja guard, approached him in the palace courtyard. "I am Marguerite," she said, her stance wide and ready. "The Empress says you are a great warrior. I wish to see this for myself. Fight me." Naruto looked at her, then at the dozens of other warriors who had gathered to watch, their faces hard and expectant. He could have ended it in a second. He could have overwhelmed her with power she couldn't possibly comprehend. But that wasn't the point. "All right," he said with a simple nod. Marguerite attacked without warning, a blur of motion. She was incredibly fast, her kicks aimed at his head and ribs, her snake bow used as a bludgeon. Her movements were infused with a strange energy, the one they called haki, which gave her strikes a tangible weight. Naruto didn't even activate Sage Mode. He moved with a liquid grace, using the most basic academy taijutsu. He didn't block, he redirected. Her powerful kick was turned aside with a gentle push on her ankle. Her rapid spearhand strikes were deflected with the back of his wrist. He was always in the right place, moving just enough to make her miss, his feet barely seeming to leave the ground. It was like watching a leaf dance in the wind, utterly untouchable. Frustrated, Marguerite lunged, putting all her strength into a single, powerful strike. Naruto simply sidestepped, his hand darting out to gently pluck the snake bow from her grasp. He spun it once, then held it out to her, handle first. She stood there, panting, her ultimate attack having met with nothing but empty air. She was completely unharmed, but utterly, comprehensively defeated. "You're fast," Naruto said, offering a genuine smile. "Your form is good." Marguerite stared at him, then at her bow, then back at him. She had been beaten, but not humiliated. He hadn't mocked her. He hadn't even seemed to be trying. He had treated the duel like a friendly spar. She snatched her bow back, her cheeks burning, and stalked away without a word, the other warriors murmuring in confusion. The second test was one of character. While walking through the city, he saw a group of women struggling to lift a massive, carved stone block into place for a building damaged in a recent storm. They strained, their muscles bulging, but the stone wouldn't budge. Without a word, Naruto bit his thumb and made a single-hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a series of smokeless puffs, a dozen perfect copies of him appeared around the stone block. The Kuja yelped in shock, jumping back and drawing their weapons. The clones just grinned, grabbed the stone, and with a collective heave-ho, lifted it into place as if it were made of foam. The original Naruto gave a thumbs up to the stunned construction crew, and the clones dissipated. The women stared at the perfectly seated block, then at the spot where the clones had been, their minds struggling to process the casual, non-violent display of impossible power. The final, and most important, test was unspoken. Hancock, in a gesture that was half invitation and half challenge, had him attend a feast in the Grand Hall. He was seated at a place of honor, served by the most beautiful women of the tribe, all of whom had been subtly instructed to gauge his reactions. They expected him to be lecherous, greedy, to stare and drool like every other man they had ever heard stories of. Naruto did none of those things. He ate with gusto, thanking every woman who brought him a dish. He marveled at the roasted sea king meat, asking what it was and how they cooked it. He complimented the strange, sweet fruits. He was polite, cheerful, and completely, utterly uninterested in the women as objects of desire. His focus was on the food and the culture. He treated them with the same casual respect he would show anyone, man or woman. This, more than anything else, shattered their preconceptions. They didn't know how to react to a man who wasn't a monster. His simple, genuine decency was more alien to them than his strange powers. Hancock watched all of this from her throne, a goblet of wine held loosely in her hand. She watched him spar without malice, help without being asked, and feast without lust. Every action he took was a chisel, chipping away at the marble walls she had built around her heart. Every genuine smile, every respectful nod, was a crack in the armor she had worn for more than a decade. That night, she couldn't sleep. The fortress of her mind was under siege, not by an army, but by the quiet integrity of a single man. She found herself on the high balcony of her chambers, looking out over her sleeping city. The air was cool, the jungle alive with the sounds of the night. Couldn't sleep either. She spun around, her hand instinctively going to her heart. Naruto was standing in the shadows of the doorway. He wasn't supposed to be able to get here. The royal wing was heavily guarded. "How did you get past my guards?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I didn't," he said softly. "I walked around them. They're good, but they look for threats. I'm not a threat." He walked onto the balcony, stopping a respectful distance away. "This is a beautiful place. You've done a good job protecting it." His compliment, so simple and sincere, caught her off guard. "It is my duty as empress," she said, her voice stiff. "It's more than that, isn't it?" he said, his gaze fixed on the jungle. "This isn't just a kingdom to you. It's a sanctuary." His perception was unnerving. He saw too much. The carefully constructed walls of her composure began to crumble, worn down by his relentless, gentle understanding. The stress of the past few days, the shock of satiety, the memory of her own helplessness, and the profound confusion this man caused in her, it all coalesced into a single, unbearable point of pressure. "You know nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know what it's like to be treated like a monster," he said, his voice laced with an ancient pain that mirrored her own. "To be hated for something you never asked for. To have something put inside you, a mark that sets you apart and makes people fear you." Her breath hitched. The air left her lungs. He couldn't know. He couldn't possibly know. But his words, they were a key turning a lock deep inside her she thought had rusted shut. What are you talking about?" "In my village," he began, his voice low, "I was the container for a great and terrible power. A tailed beast. They called me a Jinchuriki. To the villagers, I wasn't Naruto. I was the nine-tailed fox that had almost destroyed their home. They looked at me with the same eyes your people look at me now. With fear. With hatred. It was a brand on my soul long before I ever learned to fight." Tears welled in Hancock's eyes, hot and treacherous. She had not cried, truly cried, since she was a child. But his story, it wasn't pity he was offering. It was kinship. A shared damnation. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ugly sound she couldn't hold back. "The dam broke. Do you want to know why this is a sanctuary?" she choked out, the words torn from her. "Do you want to know why the law exists? Why I am the way that I am?" Without waiting for an answer, she turned her back to him and, with a single, violent motion, tore the silken fabric of her dress down the middle. There, seared into the pale skin of her back, was the horrifying, unmistakable brand. The hoof of the soaring dragon. The mark of a celestial dragon's slave. "My sisters and I, we were slaves," she confessed, the words tasting like ash. "For years. We were toys for those monsters. This mark, her voice broke. It is a brand of shame. A brand of helplessness. Every day I wake up and I know it is there. A reminder that no matter how strong I become, how many I rule, I was once property. The tears flowed freely now, silent streams tracking down her face. She stood exposed, vulnerable in a way she had not allowed herself to be in over a decade. She expected him to be disgusted. To pity her. To see her as tainted. Instead, she felt a warmth at her back. Naruto hadn't moved, but she could feel his presence, a steady, unwavering heat. A brand, he said, his voice filled with a profound, resonant empathy. A cage. Something they put on you to tell you what you are, to try and make you forget who you are. He took a slow step closer. His voice was barely a whisper. May I? She didn't know what he was asking, but she found herself giving a single, jerky nod. He raised his hand, not to touch her skin, but to hover an inch above the hideous brand. A soft, gentle warmth, like the first rays of dawn, emanated from his palm. It wasn't the searing heat of a cauterizing iron, but a deep, life-affirming energy that seeped past her skin, past her muscle, and into her very soul. It was the warmth of creation of all things, the life-giving power of the sage. He pushed not just his energy, but his own unwavering belief in her into the brand. You are not a slave. You are an empress. You are a protector. You are free. Hancock gasped. The brand, a source of constant, phantom pain for her entire adult life, suddenly felt quiet. The deep, spiritual ache that was its true poison began to soothe, the edges of a wound on her soul beginning to close for the first time. The physical mark was still there, a faint scar on her skin, but the power it held over her was being broken. She sank to her knees, overwhelmed, her strength gone. He was healing a wound she thought was eternal. He knelt in front of her, his expression one of serene understanding. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just waited. After a long time, she looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than they had been in years. The gratitude she felt was a physical force, an ocean threatening to drown her. But it was more than that. In his eyes, she didn't see a man, a threat, or an outsider. She saw a savior. She saw a power greater than the world government, a will stronger than the celestial dragons, and a heart kinder than any she had ever known. She saw the future. An actual future, not just a day-to-day survival. A new resolve, hard as diamond, formed in her heart. This man was the ultimate protector. Her island, her people, they needed more than just her strength. They needed his. To bind him to them, to bind their fates together, was the only logical, strategic, and emotional choice. It was a gamble that would change everything, a shattering of tradition that would either save them or doom them. And in that moment, she did not care. She rose to her feet, her regal composure returning, but this time it wasn't a mask. It was real. Gather the tribe, she said to the empty air, knowing her guards were just out of sight. Every single citizen. To the arena. Now. An hour later, the great fighting arena of Amazon Lily was filled to capacity. Every Kuja warrior, every citizen, every child, was present, their faces a sea of confusion and apprehension. Elder Nyan stood at the foot of the royal dais, her expression grim. Naruto stood beside her, equally confused. Hancock had simply told him his presence was required. Then she appeared. Dressed in her full imperial regalia, she walked to the center of the dais, her presence silencing the thousand-strong crowd. People of Kuja, she began, her voice resonating with a newfound power. For 1,000 years, we have lived by one law, no men on our island. This law was born of fear. Fear of the outside world, of its greed, its cruelty, and its weakness. We built these walls to hide from that world. She paused, her gaze sweeping over her people. Several days ago, on Sabaody, that world came for us. It came in the form of a world noble, the very symbol of our deepest trauma. And I, your empress, was helpless before it. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was an admission of weakness none of them had ever thought to hear. We were saved, she continued, her voice ringing with conviction. We were saved by a man who feared nothing. A man who stood up for us when no one else would. A man who faced an admiral and did not yield. He stands among you now. Naruto Uzumaki. She gestured to Naruto. 1,000 pairs of eyes, no longer hostile, but now filled with dawning respect and awe, turned to him. Our old law was a shield made of fear, Hancock declared, her voice rising to a crescendo. But to live in fear is to be a slave to what you are afraid of. I say no more. Today, we do not choose fear. We choose strength. And I see no greater strength than the man who has shown us that our enemies are not invincible. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Naruto's. He could see the unwavering fire in them, the absolute certainty of her next words. Therefore, by my authority as Empress of Amazon Lily, I hereby revoke our oldest law. And I declare that this island will no longer have only an empress to lead it. For the sake of our future, for the security of our people, and by the right of his power and the virtue of his heart, I name this man, Naruto Uzumaki. She raised her hand, pointing directly at him, her voice echoing off the mountain walls, a proclamation that would soon shake the foundations of the world. My co-ruler. The first ever emperor of Amazon Lily. In the silent, sacred heart of Mary Geos, the silhouetted figure of Imu stood before a massive, frozen straw hat. The report lay discarded. The world was a perfectly manicured garden, and Imu was its eternal gardener. For 800 years, the same flowers had bloomed, the same weeds had been plucked. It was an unchanging, perfect order. But this Naruto Uzumaki, was not a weed. It was an invasive species from another ecosystem entirely, one with the potential to choke out the entire garden. A figure emerged from the shadows and knelt. He was a man, but he seemed more like a perfectly honed weapon. His white celestial dragon robes were immaculate, his face sharp and ascetic, his eyes burning with the cold fire of absolute fanaticism. This was Saint Jigun of the Narona family, a man who, unlike his decadent peers, truly believed in the divinity of the world order. The air grew cold. A voice, ancient and genderless, echoed in Jigun's mind, not through his ears. A blasphemy has taken root in the blue sea. A power that flouts our laws and defies our nature. I have seen the reports, my God, Jigun said, his head bowed so low his forehead touched the polished floor. An anomaly. Anomalies must be corrected. You possess a unique gift. The power to unmake power. The Chikara no Mi was granted to your bloodline for a reason. It is the hand of God, meant to erase those who would claim godhood for themselves. I live only to serve your will, Jigun breathed, his voice trembling with ecstatic devotion. Go to the blue sea, the voice commanded, a whisper that held the weight of a dying star. Find this blasphemer, this Uzumaki Naruto. Observe him. Understand him. And when the time is right. The voice paused. Purge him from my garden. Saint Jigun looked up, a terrifyingly serene smile on his face. It will be as if he never existed. Chapter 3, The Emperor's Decree. The silence that followed Hancock's proclamation was of a different kind than the one that had followed the Admiral's departure. That had been a silence of shock and fear. This was a silence of profound, seismic recalculation. 1,000 Kuja warriors and citizens stared, their minds grappling with the sheer, monumental heresy of her words. An emperor. A man. Here. As their ruler. Elder Nyan was the first to break the stillness. She took a shuffling step forward, her ancient face a mask of disbelief and outrage. Hebeheim. Have you lost your mind? You cannot be serious. This is not just a breach of law, it is a betrayal of our very identity. Our ancestors cry out in shame. Hancock did not flinch. Her gaze, hard as obsidian, fell upon the elder. Our ancestors lived in a different world, Nyan. They created a law to protect us from weakness. I am honoring the spirit of that law by embracing strength. There is no greater strength on these seas than the man standing beside you. Strength? Nyan scoffed, her voice cracking with emotion. You mistake a single act of violence for a lifetime of wisdom. You would throw away a millennium of tradition for a stranger you have known for less than a week. He is a man. His nature is fickle, deceitful, and destructive. Naruto, who had been standing in stunned silence, finally found his voice. He'd been called a lot of things, but Emperor was a new one. He looked from Hancock's resolute face to Nyan's furious one and felt a familiar headache coming on. Hey, now, I'm standing right here, he said, raising a hand placatingly. And for the record, I'm not really the Emperor type. Too much paperwork. His casual, almost flippant remark in the face of such a sacred, tense moment was like a splash of cold water. Several of the younger warriors who had witnessed his power on the ship stifled nervous chuckles. Hancock's lips twitched in a ghost of a smile. His humility is further proof of his virtue, she declared, her voice booming once more. He does not seek power, which is why he is fit to wield it. My decree is not a request. It is the new law of this land. Naruto Uzumaki is the Emperor of Amazon Lily. He is my equal, and he will be afforded the same loyalty and respect you afford me. Is there anyone else who wishes to challenge my judgment? She scanned the arena, her eyes blazing with a conqueror's fire. She saw doubt. She saw confusion. But she also saw the memory of his power in their eyes, the stories already spreading like wildfire of how he'd neutralized a marine fleet in training, helped rebuild their city with impossible magic, and treated them not with lust, but with respect. More importantly, they saw the unwavering conviction in their empress. They saw that she believed this, to the core of her soul. One by one, the warriors began to kneel. First Marguerite, the warrior he had sparred with, then the women he had helped, then the crew of the perfume Yuta. Within moments, the entire arena was a sea of kneeling figures, a silent, powerful affirmation of their loyalty, not just to her, but to her decision. Elder Nyan stared, her face ashen. She had lost. The will of the Empress, bolstered by this strange man's undeniable power, had overridden 1,000 years of history. She gave Naruto a long, hard look, a look that said this was not over, and then, with a deep, weary sigh, she too bowed her head. Naruto felt a sweat drop form on his brow. He looked at Hancock, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He was trapped. He was the Emperor. Kurama's deep, rumbling laughter echoed in the back of his mind. Well, Kit. You've had stranger promotions. At least this one comes with a private island. He sighed. He'd figure it out. He always did. His first priority was protecting these people who had, however unexpectedly, put their faith in him. He knew what was coming. The world did not take kindly to defiance. The news, as it always did in this strange world, traveled on the wings of birds. The news coup dropped papers on every island, from the most desolate pirate cove to the pristine decks of marine battleships. And the headline was explosive. Pirate Empress takes a husband. Amazon Lily shatters tradition, appoints first ever male emperor. The accompanying article was a whirlwind of speculation, drawing from the frantic eyewitness accounts on Sabaody. It spoke of a mysterious, golden-haired man who had struck a celestial dragon, faced down an admiral, and then vanished with the Kuja pirates. Now, it seemed, he had been installed as a king on the island of women. The story was so outlandish, so utterly unbelievable, that it was instantly the talk of the entire world. In the office of the fleet admiral at Marineford, the newspaper lay on a heavy wooden desk, its headline smoldering under the furious gaze of the man reading it. Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, formerly Admiral Akainu, crushed the smoldering cigar in his hand into dust. The magma that composed a part of his very being bubbled just beneath the surface of his skin, making the air in the room shimmer with heat. Insolence, he growled, the word a low, volcanic rumble. This is not just piracy. This is secession. An act of war. They have taken a world-class criminal who assaulted a noble and declared him a king. They spit in the face of the world government. They spit in the face of justice. He slammed his fist on the desk, leaving a scorched, molten handprint in the solid wood. Mobilize the fleet. I want a buster call authorized for Amazon Lily. We will burn that island from the map. We will make an example of this empress and her new emperor. Absolute justice must be seen to be done. A vice admiral standing at attention flinched but saluted. Yes, Fleet Admiral Sakazuki. I will issue the orders at once. You will do nothing of the sort. The voice was cold, precise, and carried an authority that made even Sakazuki pause. Standing in the doorway were two figures in immaculate white robes, the unmistakable attire of the celestial dragons. But these were not the decadent, foolish nobles of the lower families. One was a tall, stoic man. The other was Saint Jigun of the Narona family. His serene, fanatical eyes were fixed on the fleet admiral. Sakazuki's face darkened further. He had no love for the world nobles, but he understood the hierarchy of power. And Jigun was not just any noble. He was one of Imu's chosen. This is a military matter, Saint Jigun, Sakazuki ground out, his voice tight. With barely restrained fury. It requires a military solution. And you would use a sledgehammer to perform surgery, Fleet Admiral, Jigun replied, stepping into the room. His movements were graceful, almost priestly. A buster call is a weapon of overwhelming, indiscriminate force. It is loud. It is messy. It tells our enemies nothing except that we know how to burn things. He walked to the desk and placed a finger on the picture of Naruto in the newspaper, a blurry, frantic sketch made by an artist on Sabayati. This man, this Uzumaki Naruto, is an unknown. His power is an unknown. Admiral Kizaru, one of your strongest assets, chose to retreat rather than engage him directly. Does that not tell you something? Rushing in with blunt force is what he would expect. It is what a cornered animal would expect. Sakazuki's jaw worked, the magma beneath his skin glowing brighter. He is a criminal. The solution for criminals is eradication. He is a blasphemer, Jigun corrected, his voice dropping, taking on a chillingly reverent tone. And blasphemy must be understood before it is purged. I must know the nature of his power. I must see its limits. A buster call will destroy the island, yes. But it may also allow him to escape in the chaos. Or worse, it may not even be enough to contain him. We cannot afford that uncertainty. Jigun's gaze was hypnotic. No. We will use a more delicate touch. Send a fleet. One of your most trusted vice admirals. They will make the standard demands, for Hancock to renounce her warlord status, for her to turn over the criminal Naruto Uzumaki. It is a test. We will see how he responds to a conventional threat. We will force him to show his hand. Sakazuki seethed. He wanted fire and brimstone. He was being told to play games. But the command in Jigun's eyes was not his own. It was a reflection of the will from the empty throne. Fine, Sakazuki snarled. Vice Admiral Momonga is already in the vicinity. He has dealt with the pirate empress before. He is disciplined and follows orders. I will dispatch him with 10 warships. But if he fails, I will have my buster call. If he fails, Fleet Admiral, Jigun said with a thin, cold smile, it will mean I have the data I need. And my own solution will be far more absolute than yours. The Kuja were a warrior race. The news that a marine fleet was approaching their island was met not with panic, but with a grim, determined readiness. The cliffsides bristled with archers. The port was barricaded. A palpable tension settled over the city, the air thick with the hum of hockey as the women prepared for a battle for their home. In the royal palace, Hancock stood before a large, tactical map of the island, her sisters and top commanders beside her. She was in her element, a queen preparing for war. "Their fleet will be forced to approach through the main channel," she said, her finger tracing a line on the map. "It creates a perfect kill box. Our archers on the cliffs can rain down arrows from both sides. We will sink the lead ship here," she tapped the narrowest point, "and bottle them in. Then we destroy them at our leisure." Her commanders nodded, their faces grim but confident. It was a sound strategy. "No," the single word cut through the confidence in the room. All eyes turned to Naruto, who had been leaning against a pillar, his arms crossed. Hancock's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, no?" "It is the perfect defensive strategy. We will crush them with minimal losses to our side." "You'll crush a bunch of soldiers who are just following orders," Naruto countered, walking toward the map. "And then they'll send another fleet, a bigger one. And then another. You'll win this battle, but you'll be signing up for a war you can't win through attrition. The world government has more ships and more bodies than you can possibly imagine." "Then what do you suggest, Emperor?" Marigold asked, her tone still laced with skepticism. "We simply let them land and arrest you." "I suggest we send them a message instead of a declaration of war," Naruto said. He looked at Hancock, his gaze steady. "I'm going out there." "Alone?" Hancock's eyes widened in alarm. "That's suicide. There are 10 warships. Thousands of men. They're coming for me," he stated simply. "This is my mess. I'll handle it. I don't want any of your people getting hurt because of me." The sincerity in his voice silenced the room. The commanders looked at each other, a newfound respect dawning in their eyes. He wasn't hiding behind them. He was shielding them. Hancock's heart clenched. It was a terrifying, infuriating, and deeply moving gesture. Her instinct, her every fiber, screamed at her to go with him, to fight beside him. But the look in his eyes, it was the same calm, unwavering certainty he'd had when he faced Kizaru. He had a plan. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto grinned, a flash of the old, confident knucklehead she was just starting to get to know. "I'm going to have a little talk with them." A few minutes later, the Kuja lookouts on the cliffs cried out in astonishment. They watched as a single figure leapt from the palace balcony, landing lightly on the surface of the ocean as if it were solid ground. He stood there for a moment, the water placid around his feet, then began to run, speeding across the sea towards the approaching fleet, a single orange blur against the vast blue. Aboard the lead warship, Vice Admiral Momonga stood on the prow, his long, samurai-like topknot swaying in the breeze. He was a stern, disciplined man, his face set in grim lines. He had his orders, and he would carry them out, no matter how distasteful. He'd had to threaten to kill himself to get his own crew to ignore Hancock's charms on a previous mission. He knew the dangers of this place. "Sir," a lookout shouted from the crow's nest. "Target sighted." A single man, approaching on foot. "On the water." Momonga raised his spyglass. He focused on the rapidly approaching figure. It was the man from the newspaper. He was running on the surface of the ocean. Momonga's hand tightened on the hilt of his katana. This was already beyond a normal mission. "All ships, battle stations," he commanded, his voice booming across the deck. "Cannoneers, load the guns. Prepare to fire on my command." The fleet bristled to life. Hundreds of cannon ports opened, the black mouths of the guns aiming at the lone figure. The decks swarmed with marines, their rifles raised, their faces a mixture of determination and disbelief. Naruto skidded to a halt about 200 meters from the lead ship, the water splashing around his ankles. He stood there, alone, facing down a fleet of 10 battleships and their thousands of crew. "That's far enough." Momonga's voice, amplified by a den mushi, boomed across the water. You are Naruto Uzumaki, I presume. By the authority of the world government, you are under arrest for assaulting a world noble. Surrender now, and the Kuja will be spared. Naruto just smiled. That's not much of a choice, is it? How about this, you turn your ships around and leave. Go tell your boss that Amazon Lily is under new management, and we'd like to be left alone. Momonga's face hardened. We do not negotiate with criminals. This is your final warning. Fire. The world erupted in thunder. 100 cannons fired at once, a volley of explosive steel hurtling towards Naruto. It was enough firepower to turn a small island into a crater. From the cliffs of Amazon Lily, Hancock watched, her heart leaping into her throat. She screamed his name. Naruto simply raised a hand and made a single, familiar hand sign. Tajukage Bunshin no Jutsu. The air around him exploded into a solid mass of orange and black. It wasn't a dozen clones, or 100. It was thousands. An entire army, a veritable tsunami of Naruto Uzumakis, appeared on the surface of the water in an instant. The cannonballs, which had seemed so overwhelming a second before, were lost in the tide. What happened next was a display of such overwhelming, systematic chaos that the Marines' minds couldn't process it. The clones charged. They ran across the water, an unstoppable wave of bodies. The Marines opened fire with their rifles, but for every clone they managed to hit, which dissolved in a puff of smoke, 10 more took its place. They swarmed the first ship. It was not a battle. It was a deconstruction. One group of clones overwhelmed the cannoneers, not with punches, but with a flurry of activity. They yanked the cannonballs from the barrels, dismantled the firing mechanisms, and tied the cannons themselves into knots with ninja wire, all in a matter of seconds. Another group swarmed the engine room, pulling critical parts from the machinery and tossing them overboard. A third group, armed with pre-made bundles of zip ties, systematically neutralized the riflemen, tying their hands and feet with terrifying speed and efficiency before moving on to the next. Naruto himself, the original, hadn't moved. He stood watching as his clones, like a colony of industrious ants, took apart the entire fleet, piece by piece. They were a force of nature, an army that could be anywhere and everywhere at once, their movements coordinated by a single, shared mind. On the third ship, a Marine captain, a veteran of the Grand Line, tried to rally his men. Stand your ground. Fight for justice, he roared, cutting down a clone with his cutlass. 2 more immediately appeared at his side, one disarming him while the other wrapped him in wire. Sorry, Captain, they said in unison with a cheerful grin. Emperor's orders. No one gets hurt. Within 10 minutes, it was over. All 10 warships were dead in the water, their engines disabled, their rudders jammed, their cannons silenced. Thousands of Marine soldiers were sitting on the decks, tied up and looking utterly bewildered. They hadn't been beaten. They had been disassembled. Naruto walked across the water, stepping onto the deck of Momonga's flagship. The vice admiral stood alone, his katana drawn, his face pale but his eyes burning with a warrior's pride. He was the only one left standing. You have fought honorably, Vice Admiral, Naruto said, his voice respectful. He gestured to the incapacitated fleet. I did this without harming a single one of your men. There's no need for this to go any further. Momonga's knuckles were white on the hilt of his sword. He had been so comprehensively, so bizarrely defeated that he didn't even know how to respond. This changes nothing. The world government will not tolerate this. Maybe, Naruto said. But today, you will. He took a step closer, and his cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by an intensity that made the air crackle. He raised one hand, and a swirling sphere of pure, compressed wind energy, screaming like 1,000 tiny blades, appeared in his palm. A Rasengan. He didn't aim it at Momonga. He aimed it at the water next to the ship. He thrust his hand forward. The sphere made contact. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, the ocean itself seemed to explode. A colossal waterspout, a roaring vortex of sea and wind, erupted next to the ship, towering hundreds of feet into the air. The battleship was tossed like a child's toy, the shockwave nearly throwing Momonga from his feet. The sheer, destructive power on display was terrifying, absolute. It could have obliterated the entire ship in an instant. Naruto lowered his hand, the wind dying down. He looked Momonga directly in the eye. Go back and tell your fleet admiral what you saw here today. Tell him what I did. And then tell him what I could have done. The next fleet they send won't be met with zip ties. Now, untie your men and go home. With that, Naruto turned and leapt from the ship, running back towards Amazon Lily, leaving a stunned and deeply shaken Vice Admiral Momonga standing alone on the deck of his crippled flagship. Naruto arrived back at the palace to a hero's welcome. The Kuja warriors cheered, their bows raised in salute. They had watched the entire confrontation from the cliffs, their minds struggling to comprehend the scale of what they had witnessed. He hadn't just won. He had won on his own terms, with a level of power and control that was godlike. Hancock met him at the entrance, her face a storm of relief and something else, frustration. She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the celebrating crowd and into a private chamber. "Are you insane?" she hissed, once they were alone. She was furious, but he could feel the tremor of fear for him underneath it. "You should have destroyed them. Sunk their ships to the bottom of the calm belt. Sent a message that couldn't be ignored." "I did send a message," Naruto countered, his voice calm. "I sent a better one." "A better one?" "You let them go," she shot back, her voice rising. "You showed them your power and then you showed them mercy. They will not see that as strength, you fool. They will see it as a weakness. A flaw in your character they can exploit. This world, our enemy, they do not understand compassion. They only understand force. To them, a hand that is offered in peace is a hand that is ready to be shackled." Her words were sharp, born of years of brutal experience. Her philosophy was kill or be killed, because for her, any other path had led to a cage. "Then we'll have to teach them," Naruto said, his voice unwavering. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "Hancock, look at me. True strength isn't about how much you can destroy. Any fool with enough power can break things. True strength is having the power to shatter the world in your hands, and choosing to build something with it instead. It's about having the power to kill your enemy, and choosing to let him live so he has a chance to understand." "They will never understand," she cried, her frustration boiling over. "They will take your mercy and use it to sharpen the blade they'll slide between your ribs." "Then let them try," he said, his voice softening. "I've spent my whole life betting on people. On their ability to change. I turned enemies who wanted me dead into my closest friends. I'm not going to stop now. I'm not going to become like them just to beat them. If we destroy everyone who disagrees with us, what are we protecting? An empty island? A pile of ashes? I'm protecting people. And that means giving even my enemies a chance to walk away." Hancock stared at him, speechless. His idealism was so profound, so utterly at odds with the brutal reality of the world she knew, that it felt like a fantasy. And yet, he had the power to back it up. He had just proven it. This was their first true conflict, not of arms, but of ideals. Her hardened, pragmatic survivalism against his unshakable, powerful faith in others. She wanted to argue more, to scream at him that he was a naive dreamer who would get them all killed. But she couldn't. Because in that moment, she realized that his naive, idealistic dream was the first thing that had ever made her feel truly safe. She turned away, unable to look at him. "You are a fool, Naruto Uzumaki." The words were sharp, but they lacked their earlier bite. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "I get that a lot. Miles away, hidden in the shadow of a towering rock formation in the calm belt, a ship of matte black metal, designed to absorb light and radar, floated silently. On its bridge, a series of glowing monitors displayed crystal-clear footage of the entire encounter, captured from multiple angles by stealth drones. Saint Jigun sat in a command chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes gleaming as he replayed the moment Naruto's clones had swarmed the marine fleet. His elite purifiers worked silently around him, analyzing the data streams. Energy readings are off the charts, Lord Jigun, one of the technicians reported, his voice flat and professional. The subject creates solid-state energy constructs with independent operational capacity. The sheer number, it defies all known models of devil fruit or hockey application. The final energy discharge, the Rasengan, registered as a localized Category 5 typhoon in terms of raw kinetic force. Jigun wasn't listening to the numbers. He was watching Naruto's face as he let Momonga go. He was watching the mercy. The choice. He smiled, a thin, chilling expression. The analysis is simple, Jigun said, his voice a soft purr that cut through the sterile hum of the bridge. The subject possesses the power of a god, but he is crippled by the sentiment of a mortal. He seeks to convert, not to conquer. He offers mercy where absolute destruction is required. He pointed a slender finger at the screen, at Naruto's smiling face. That, Saint Jigun whispered, his eyes burning with cold, zealous fire, is the flaw. That is the weakness we will use to break him. He wants to save everyone. So, we will force him to choose who is worth saving. He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to Mary Geos. Phase 1 is complete. The subject's psychological profile is confirmed. Proceeding to Phase 2, provocation and isolation. The black ship turned, its engines making no sound, and slipped away into the dead waters of the calm belt, a shark that had just learned the scent of its prey's blood. Chapter 4, Whispers in the Calm Belt. The defeat, or rather, the non-lethal disassembly, of Momonga's fleet had an immediate and profound effect on Amazon Lily. The cloud of impending war dissipated, replaced by a strange, almost festive atmosphere. Naruto's status as emperor was no longer a shocking decree, it was a celebrated fact. The Kuja warriors, who had once viewed him with suspicion, now looked at him with a mixture of hero worship and genuine curiosity. They saw him not as an invader, but as their impenetrable shield. For Naruto, the newfound peace was a welcome respite, but it was also disorienting. He spent his days exploring the island, a pack of curious children and young warriors often trailing him. He sparred with them, always holding back, teaching them to think beyond pure offense. He used clones to help with construction, hunting, and even cooking, his boundless energy infusing the entire city with a new vitality. Yet, a restlessness gnawed at him. He was a protector, yes, but he was a protector in a gilded cage. He knew nothing of this world beyond what he'd seen on Sabaody and what little Elder Nyan would grudgingly tell him. The Grand Line, the Four Blues, the Devil Fruits, hockey, the revolutionaries, it was all a complex tapestry he could only see the edges of. Hancock saw his restlessness. She saw it in the way he would stand on the highest cliffs, staring out at the endless, empty horizon of the calm belt. She saw it in the questions he asked about trade routes and political alliances. She had bound him to her island with a title, but she knew his spirit was too vast to be contained. She also knew that their victory was temporary. The world government was not an enemy that simply gave up. They were a patient, monolithic power, and their silence was more unnerving than an immediate reprisal. They were studying him, waiting. The ideological clash they'd had after he'd let the fleet go still hung in the air between them. In the quiet moments they shared, a new, tentative dynamic was forming. She would watch him play with the children, a gentle giant who could level an army, and feel a warmth spread through her chest that was both wonderful and terrifying. He, in turn, saw past her empress facade to the fierce, vulnerable woman beneath, the one who fought so desperately to protect her people from a world that had shown her no mercy. The respect between them was growing, deepening into a genuine affection that neither was quite ready to name. It was during one such quiet evening, sitting on her balcony overlooking the moonlit jungle, that she made a decision. "You are bored," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Naruto, who had been leaning on the railing, turned to her with a slight smile. "Is it that obvious? You have the energy of a summer storm contained in a bottle," she replied, a hint of amusement in her voice. "This island is too small for you. You need to understand the world you are now a part of. And I need to understand our enemy." Naruto's expression grew serious. "What are you proposing?" "The world government has revoked my status as a warlord. It was inevitable after the news broke," she said, her voice laced with disdain for the title she'd never wanted. "This makes us a rogue nation in their eyes. But it also makes us free. We no longer have to play by their rules. There are whispers, carried on the black market currents, of unrest. Of powerful figures growing disillusioned with the fleet admiral's absolute justice. The actions on Sabaody and the defeat of Momonga's fleet have sent ripples through the underworld. They see us as a new power, a possible ally." She stood, her silken dress shimmering in the moonlight. "We cannot wait for the war to come to us. We must go to it. We will take the perfume Yuta into the Grand Line. We will gauge the political climate, seek out potential allies, and show the world that the banner of Amazon Lily is not one to be trifled with." Her eyes met his, and he saw the thrill of adventure in them, the spirit of a pirate queen reawakening. "And besides," she added, a sly glint in her eyes, "you need to see what a real sea looks like, one with wind in its sails." Naruto felt a grin spread across his face. It was the perfect plan. It satisfied his need to learn, her need for strategic advantage, and a shared, unspoken desire to simply be away from the confines of their royal duties, together. "When do we leave?" he asked. Leaving was a simple affair. Hancock left the island in the capable hands of her sisters and elder Nyan, who, despite her disapproval, was a fiercely competent administrator. The perfume Yuta sailed with a skeleton crew of elite Kuja warriors, hand-picked for their skill and loyalty. For the first time, Naruto stood on the deck of a ship as it left the eerie stillness of the calm belt and entered the chaotic, unpredictable waters of the Grand Line. The change was instantaneous and exhilarating. The wind hit them like a physical force, filling the single, massive sail. The sea, which had been as flat as glass, became a churning, living entity. The sky was filled with clouds that moved at impossible speeds. A log pose, a strange compass with 3 needles spinning wildly, was strapped to Hancock's wrist. "This is the Grand Line," she said, her voice filled with a captain's pride as she stood beside him at the prow. The sea spray misted her face, and her black hair whipped in the wind. She seemed more alive, more vibrant here than she ever did on her throne. "The weather is mad, the currents are treacherous, and the islands are each a world unto themselves. Welcome to the pirate's paradise." Naruto laughed, a full, open sound of pure joy. The sheer, untamed nature energy of this place was intoxicating. It was chaotic and wild, a stark contrast to the balanced, harmonious energy of his homeland. He could feel the bizarre magnetic fields that pulled the log pose needles, the strange ecosystems of the islands they passed, the colossal sea creatures that swam in the deep. For weeks, they sailed. The journey was an education. They navigated whirlpools that appeared from nowhere, dodged rainstorms of hail the size of cannonballs, and sailed past islands where it was eternally night. Hancock was a brilliant captain, reading the mad weather and the treacherous currents with an instinct that bordered on precognition. Her crew adored her, following her commands with flawless efficiency. During the long days at sea, she became his teacher. She explained the delicate and brutal balance of power between the 4 emperors, the godlike pirates who ruled the second half of the Grand Line, the world government, and the burgeoning revolutionary army that sought to topple it all. She taught him about devil fruits, the mythical fruits that granted wondrous and terrifying powers at the cost of the user's ability to swim. She explained the 3 forms of haki, the armor of armament, the precognition of observation, and the rare, overwhelming will of the conqueror. "You possess it," she said one afternoon, watching him effortlessly dodge a training arrow shot by Marguerite from across the ship. "Observation hockey. But yours is different. More, total. You don't just sense intent, you feel life itself. We call it Sage Mode," Naruto explained, catching the arrow out of the air. "It's about becoming one with nature energy. I can feel everything that's alive around me. It makes it hard for people to sneak up on me." During the quiet nights, under a blanket of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, he became her teacher. He told her of his world, of Konoha, of the 5 great shinobi nations. He spoke of his friends, of Sakura's fierce intelligence, Kakashi's quiet wisdom, and even of Sasuke, his brother in all but blood, a story of darkness and redemption that mirrored her own in ways that made her heart ache. He spoke of his dream, not of being a king or an emperor, but of a world where people could understand one another's pain without having to share it, a world where no child would have to endure the loneliness he had. She would listen, captivated. His world was so different, filled with organized villages of ninja, chakra, and colossal summoned beasts. But the emotions, the struggles, the bonds of friendship and the pain of loss, they were universal. His stories filled the hollow places in her own past. The gratitude she felt for him for saving her was a powerful, foundational thing, but it was slowly being eclipsed by something deeper, more personal. She was beginning to admire the man, not just the savior. His unwavering optimism, which she had once seen as a weakness, was starting to look like the most resilient kind of strength. One evening, as they shared a meal on the deck, she found herself laughing at his clumsy attempt to use chopsticks, a utensil foreign to him. It was a real, unrestrained laugh, and the sound of it made him pause. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the empress or the warlord, but just a woman with a beautiful smile. A comfortable, easy silence settled between them, a silence born not of tension, but of a shared, deepening connection. He was starting to feel something for her that went beyond protective instinct. He was starting to fall for the pirate empress. Their idyllic journey was interrupted on a gray, overcast morning. The ship was sailing through a stretch of sea littered with the shattered remains of other vessels, the flotsam of some great naval battle. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the ocean in a damp, silent shroud. Marguerite, posted in the crow's nest, called down, her voice tight with alarm. "Ship sighted. Dead ahead. It's just a coffin." Everyone rushed to the rail. Drifting towards them through the mist was a small, coffin-shaped boat, lit by 2 eerie, green-flamed candles. A single figure was seated on it, a massive, cross-shaped object strapped to his back. He was a tall man in ornate, vaguely vampiric attire, with a hawk-like gaze that seemed to pierce the fog and stare directly into their souls. Hancock's breath hitched. "Dracul, Hawkeye, my hawk," she whispered, her voice tight. The name sent a ripple of fear through the Kuja crew. The strongest swordsman in the world. A man whose power was said to be on par with the 4 emperors. A lone wanderer whose whims could spell the doom of entire pirate fleets. "He's another warlord," or was, Naruto said, his senses on high alert. The man radiated an aura of calm, supreme confidence. His haki was unbelievably refined, a blade so sharp it felt like it was already cutting the air around him. "He is no ally of the government," Hancock said, her hand resting on her hip. "He does as he pleases. Why is he here?" Mihawk's little boat drifted to a stop a few dozen meters from the perfume Udall. He did not speak. His golden, hawk-like eyes scanned the ship, passing over the Kuja warriors with disinterest, lingering on Hancock for a moment of detached recognition, before finally settling on Naruto. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. "So, you are the one," Mihawk's voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried easily across the water. It was not loud, but it commanded attention. "The man who struck a god and turned an admiral away. The world is buzzing with your name, Naruto Uzumaki." Naruto met his gaze, unafraid. I've been getting that a lot lately. Mihawk's lips curved in a predatory smile. They say you possess a power unlike any seen before. I am a man with simple tastes. I enjoy a good bottle of wine, a sturdy vessel, and the thrill of facing a worthy blade. But the number of worthy blades in this world is depressingly small. I have grown bored. His gaze sharpened. I am curious to see if your power sings a more interesting song. He stood, his hand moving to the hilt of the colossal black blade on his back. It was not a threat. It was an invitation. A demand. Hancock stepped forward. Mihawk, we have no quarrel with you. Let us pass. My business is not with you, Pirate Empress, Mihawk said, his eyes never leaving Naruto. It is with him. I wish to measure him. Unless you think your power can stop me. The casual dismissal, the utter certainty that she was no threat to him, made Hancock's blood run cold. She knew it was true. Before she could say anything else, Naruto placed a hand on her shoulder. It's all right, Hancock. I'm curious, too. He leapt from the deck of the perfume Yuta, landing silently on the calm patch of water between the two ships. He stood on the surface, facing the world's greatest swordsman. The Kuja crew watched, their hearts in their throats. No swords, Naruto said, rolling his shoulders. I'm more of a hands-on kind of guy. Mihawk chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. As you wish. He drew the black blade, Yoru, from his back. The sword was a masterpiece, a supreme-grade blade whose very presence seemed to warp the air around it. The moment it was unsheathed, the pressure in the atmosphere skyrocketed. Then come. Show me this power that has the world government in such a panic. Naruto didn't hesitate. He entered sage mode in an instant, the golden pigmentation appearing around his eyes. The world snapped into hyperfocus. He could feel the infinitesimally small shifts in Mihawk's muscles, the flow of his haki into the blade, the very intent of his soul. He shot forward, a golden blur across the water's surface. He didn't lead with a flashy jutsu. He led with pure, sage-enhanced taijutsu. His fist, coated in a thin layer of natural energy, flew towards Mihawk's face. Mihawk didn't move his feet. The motion was purely in his upper body, a slight, almost lazy turn of his wrist. Yoru moved, a black arc of death that seemed too slow, yet it was perfectly positioned to intercept the punch. Naruto's senses screamed. He knew, with absolute certainty, that if his fist connected with that blade, his arm would be severed, sage mode or not. The haki infused in it was of a level he had never encountered, an absolute, cutting finality. He twisted his body in mid-air, his punch turning into an open palm that slapped against the flat of the blade, redirecting the blow. The force of the impact sent a shockwave across the water, parting the fog. He used the momentum to spin, his legs sweeping around in a powerful kick aimed at Mihawk's head. Mihawk blocked the kick with his forearm, his arm coated in a gleaming black layer of armament haki. The impact was like steel hitting stone. He didn't even slide back an inch. Impressive, Mihawk commented, his hawk-like eyes gleaming with interest. You have speed and strength. Your senses are remarkable. You see the path of the blade. You're pretty good yourself, for an old guy, Naruto shot back, creating a Rasengan in his free hand. The swirling sphere of wind chakra shrieked, its destructive power obvious. He thrust it forward. Mihawk met it not with a block, but with a slash. A flying blade of compressed air, infused with his haki, shot from the tip of Yoru. It was a ranged attack, a swordsman's technique of the highest caliber. The Rasengan and the flying slash collided between them. The result was not a simple explosion. The Rasengan's chaotic, grinding power tore at the focused, cutting edge of Mihawk's attack. The two forces annihilated each other in a violent implosion of air and energy that sent both men sliding back across the water. From the deck of the perfume Yuta, Hancock and her crew could only watch in stunned silence. This was a battle on a level they could barely comprehend. It wasn't just strength against strength. It was two different philosophies of combat. Naruto was a whirlwind of unpredictable, explosive energy, his sage mode precognition allowing him to react to threats before they fully formed. Mihawk was a mountain of absolute skill, his observation haki so advanced it bordered on true future sight, allowing him to see several seconds ahead and counter Naruto's moves before he even made them. It was a perfect stalemate of two different forms of precognition. He needs more power, Naruto muttered, creating distance. He formed a hand sign. A clone appeared beside him, and together they began to form a new technique. A massive Rasengan, larger than any he'd used before, began to form, a miniature, howling hurricane in his hands. Mihawk watched, his expression unreadable. A bigger attack will not change the outcome, he said, raising Yoru. The blade began to glow with a sickly green energy. The result will be the same. But Naruto grinned. Who said it was for you? He and his clone thrust the giant Rasengan not at Mihawk, but straight down into the ocean. The sea detonated. A truly colossal pillar of water, hundreds of meters wide, erupted from the depths, turning their battlefield into a chaotic, swirling maelstrom. It was a smokescreen, a diversion, an environmental attack of immense scale. In the split second of chaos, as vision was obscured by a wall of water, Naruto moved. He formed two more clones. One charged Mihawk from the front, a decoy. The other, along with Naruto himself, sank beneath the churning waves. Mihawk dispatched the decoy clone with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, his observation haki telling him it was a fake. But the attack had served its purpose. It had occupied him for a barest fraction of a second. From beneath, two identical fists, glowing with the golden energy of the six paths, shot up out of the water. They weren't aimed at Mihawk himself, but at the tiny, coffin-like boat he was standing on. The boat exploded into splinters. For the first time in the fight, Mihawk's calm expression broke. He was sent tumbling into the air, his footing gone. In that moment of airborne vulnerability, the real Naruto shot out of the water like a torpedo, a truth-seeking orb formed into a black staff, aimed directly at Mihawk's chest. Mihawk, with incredible acrobatic skill, twisted his body in midair. He couldn't fully dodge, but he managed to angle his black blade to block the staff. The black orb and the black blade met. Clang. The sound was not of metal on metal. It was a sound that broke reality, a high-pitched, resonant shriek that vibrated in the bones. A shockwave of pure force erupted from the point of impact, vaporizing the fog and flattening the sea for miles in every direction. Naruto was thrown back, his staff dissolving back into an orb. Mihawk was also sent flying, landing gracefully on the deck of the now distant perfume Yuda in a crouch. They stood there, panting slightly, staring at each other from across the water. The duel was over. Mihawk slowly stood up, sheathing his great sword. He looked at his hands, which were trembling slightly. A wide, genuine grin spread across his face. It was the expression of a man who had been starving and was just served a feast. Uzumaki Naruto, he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. Your power does not sing. It roars. It is a wild and untamable storm. It has been a very, very long time since I have had to try that hard. Naruto grinned back, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. You're not so bad yourself. You almost made me use my other hand. Mihawk let out a short, sharp laugh. He turned to leave, leaping from the ships. Rail and onto a piece of floating debris from their battle. A word of advice, he called back, his tone suddenly serious. The world government and their dogs are predictable. They are a problem of scale, not substance. But there are older, stranger things in these seas. The gods on the red line are not the only ones who claim divinity. Be careful who you draw the attention of. With that cryptic warning, he propelled his makeshift raft away with a small, precise slash of haki, disappearing into the now clear horizon. Naruto returned to the ship, the crew parting for him like the sea, their faces filled with utter reverence. He had just fought the world's strongest swordsman to a standstill. He was not just an emperor by title, he was a true emperor of the seas. Hancock rushed to him, her hands hovering over his chest, checking for injuries. "Are you all right? You're bleeding." "It's just a scratch," he said, his grin softening as he looked at her. Her concern was so genuine, so raw, it made his heart beat faster. "See? I told you I could handle it." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his. The adrenaline of the fight, the fear for his safety, the overwhelming pride in his strength, it all swirled together, breaking down the last of her defenses. Before she could think, before her pride could stop her, she reached up, grabbed the front of his jacket, and pulled him down, her lips crashing against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, and full of 1,000 unspoken emotions. It was a kiss that said, "You terrified me," and "You amaze me," and "Don't you ever do that again," all at once. Naruto was frozen for a second, his mind short-circuiting. Then, he responded. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and deepened the kiss. It was a confirmation, an acceptance. The affection that had been growing between them for weeks finally had a voice, and it was a roaring flame. They broke apart, both breathless. They just looked at each other, the world around them fading away. The cheering of the crew, the sound of the sea, it all vanished. In that moment, there was only the two of them. Suddenly, a cold dread washed over Naruto, so intense it was a physical blow. His sage mode, still active, screamed a warning. It wasn't a physical threat. It was something far worse. An oppressive, malevolent aura enveloped the entire ship, making the air feel thick and heavy, like liquid poison. The sky, which had been cleared by their battle, seemed to darken. Hancock felt it too, a primal fear that made the brand on her back ache with a phantom pain. The crew of the perfume Yuta fell to their knees, gasping for breath, their haki providing no defense against this suffocating presence. A figure appeared on the deck. He hadn't arrived on a boat. He hadn't flown. He simply was there. It was Saint Jigun. He stood calmly, his white robes unstained, his expression one of serene disappointment. "Such a display," Jigun said, his voice a soft, cultured whisper that was somehow louder than the wind. "All this power. All this passion. And all of it, blasphemy." Naruto immediately moved to stand in front of Hancock, shielding her. "Who are you?" he demanded, his body tensing, his truth-seeking orbs swirling defensively behind him. "I am a humble servant of the world's true God," Jigun said with a placid smile. He raised a hand, his palm open. "And I am here to deliver a sermon." He didn't attack. He just activated his power. Naruto felt it instantly. It was like a drain had been opened at the core of his being. The natural energy he was drawing from the world was being siphoned away, pulled from him and drawn towards Jigun. His sage mode flickered and died. The truth-seeking orbs wavered, becoming unstable. His chakra, his very life force, felt muted. Dampened. Hancock cried out, stumbling. The connection to her devil fruit, the power that allowed her to turn people to stone, was gone. It felt like a part of her soul had been scooped out. "This is the power of the Chikara no Mi," Jigun explained, his voice calm and instructional. "The power fruit. It allows me to control energy itself. To nullify it. To redirect it. Your devil fruits, your haki, your strange chakra, it is all just energy. And all energy bows to my will." He took a step closer. Naruto stood his ground, but he could feel the terrifying truth of Jigun's words. His connection to Kurama was being suppressed. He was being reduced, from a demigod to a mere mortal, just by this man's presence. "This is but a taste," Jigun said, stopping just out of reach. "A warning. Your existence is an aberration. A chaotic note in the perfect, silent symphony of the world order. I am the conductor's hand, here to ensure you are silenced. He looked past Naruto, his cold eyes settling on Hancock. You, Pirate Empress, have chosen to chain yourself to this blasphemy. You will share in his judgment. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, Jigun vanished. The oppressive aura lifted. The air rushed back into everyone's lungs. Naruto's sage mode flared back to life, his powers returning in a rush. Hancock gasped, feeling her devil fruit's energy return. But the relief was overshadowed by the chilling reality of what had just happened. They were left trembling, not from a physical attack, but from the horrifying vulnerability they had just experienced. Naruto looked at Hancock. The passion of their kiss was replaced by the cold, hard steel of a shared purpose. They had faced a swordsman who could fight them to a standstill. But now they had seen the face of their true enemy. An enemy who didn't need to fight them. An enemy who could simply unmake them. Chapter 5, The Siege of the Lily. The silence that followed St. Jigun's departure was deeper and colder than any they had yet experienced. It was the silence of a tomb. The brief, terrifying demonstration of the Chikara no Mi had done more damage than any cannonade or sword strike. It had stripped away their power, their confidence, their very sense of self, leaving behind a chilling, naked vulnerability. Naruto's sage mode had returned in a flood, nature energy pouring back into him as if to fill a vacuum. But the memory of its absence was a phantom limb, an ache where his strength should have been. He looked at Hancock. Her face was pale, her usual imperial confidence shattered, replaced by the wide, haunted eyes of someone who had just stared into the abyss. She was touching her own arm, as if to reassure herself that her power was still there. The casual, absolute way Jigun had nullified her devil fruit was a violation more profound than any physical blow. It was an attack on her very essence. The Kuja crew, now back on their feet, looked between their two leaders, their faces etched with a new kind of fear. Mihawk had been a force of nature, a rival to be respected. Jigun was something else entirely. He was a philosophical threat, a walking negation. How do you fight an enemy who can turn off your ability to fight? What was that? Marguerite stammered, her voice trembling as she helped another warrior to her feet. Our haki, it just vanished. It was a message, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. The last vestiges of the joyous adrenaline from his duel with Mihawk had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He had faced enemies who could absorb his power before, but this was different. Jigun hadn't absorbed it, he had commanded it to cease. It was an ontological attack, a violation of the natural order. He was showing us that he can beat us without throwing a single punch. Hancock finally found her voice, her regal bearing returning, though it was now brittle, like a mask of glass. He is the true threat. The admirals, the warlords, they are just the dogs. He is the master. She looked at Naruto, a desperate fire in her eyes. Your power, he suppressed it. Even your connection to the nine-tailed beast. Naruto nodded grimly. It felt like he was closing a valve. Kurama was there, but the pathway to his chakra was choked off. I could feel him fighting it, but it was like trying to shout through a wall of lead. The implications were staggering. If Jigun could do that to Naruto, a being whose power rivaled God's, then no one was safe. We must return to Amazon Lily. Now, Hancock commanded, her voice ringing with urgency. The brief, adventurous freedom of their journey was over. The hunt had begun, and they were the prey. This sermon was not just for us. It was a prelude. He will come for the island. She was right. Jigun hadn't appeared just to gloat. He had appeared to plant a seed of terror, to show them the futility of resistance before the hammer fell. He wanted them to feel hopeless. Naruto clenched his fists, the memory of his helplessness fueling a white-hot resolve. Let him come, he said, his voice resonating with a dangerous calm. He wanted to see my power. Fine. I'll show him. The journey back to Amazon Lily was a stark contrast to their voyage out. The easy camaraderie was replaced by a tense, focused silence. Naruto and Hancock spent hours together, not with stories and laughter, but with strategy. They pored over maps of the island, planning defenses, contingency plans, evacuation routes. The kiss they had shared, a moment of pure, unadulterated connection, now felt like a lifetime ago. It was a promise made in a time of peace, and they were now entering a time of war. That shared moment, however, had forged a new bond between them. They were no longer just an empress and her mysterious protector. They were partners, their minds and goals perfectly in sync. In the holy city of Mary Geos, Saint Jigun stood before the 5 elders. The chamber was dark, the faces of the world's highest leaders obscured in shadow, but their displeasure was a palpable force. "You have failed, Jigun," the elder with the sword growled. "Your subtle approach has resulted in the public humiliation of a vice-admiral and the loss of 10 warships' combat capability. You were meant to gather data, not embolden them." "On the contrary," Jigun replied, his voice serene, utterly unperturbed by their anger. "My approach has yielded results beyond your imagining. I have confirmed the subject's psychological profile. He is a protector, burdened by a savior complex. He values mortal life to an irrational degree. He possesses overwhelming power, but is hamstrung by a reluctance to use it lethally." Jigun's eyes gleamed. "And I have given him a taste of my power. I have shown him that his chakra is not beyond my reach. I have planted fear in the heart of the pirate empress. Fear is the most potent of fertilizers. It will make their defiance all the more desperate, and their eventual fall all the more spectacular. Enough of your pontificating." Sakazuki's voice boomed from a large screen. Den Mushi, his magma-lit face a mask of fury. "They are rebels and criminals. They must be annihilated. Give me the Buster Call." "A Buster Call is an axe, Fleet Admiral." "I require a scalpel," Jigun said smoothly. "I do not want to merely destroy the island. I want to capture the full spectrum of Uzumaki Naruto's abilities. A simple bombardment will force him to act defensively, to escape. I need to force him to go on the absolute offensive. I need to push him to the very edge of his power, to the point where he holds nothing back." "And how do you propose to do that?" the bald elder asked, his interest piqued. Jigun's smile was thin and cruel. "By threatening to destroy not just his new throne, but everything he has sworn to protect. I will not be leading a Buster Call. I will be leading a purge. My elite purifiers, a full marine fleet, and a new variable, the latest generation of Pacifista, their databanks uploaded with everything we have gathered on the subject's energy signatures." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I will not level the island from afar. I will land troops. I will put his people, the women and children he has charmed, directly in the line of fire. I will force him into a choice, unleash the full, monstrous extent of his power to protect them, or watch them perish because of his restraint." A cold silence filled the room. Jigun's strategy was not just military, it was psychological. It was profoundly cruel. The elder with the long beard nodded slowly. "You believe this will provide the data necessary for the final solution?" "I am certain of it," Jigun confirmed. "When he unleashes his true form, the one Kizaru's report only hinted at, our systems will capture it. And that data will be the key to activating the Godslayer. We will have crafted the perfect weapon to erase him from existence." Sakazuki was silent on the screen, his rage momentarily supplanted by the cold, vicious logic of the plan. It was the kind of absolute, inescapable trap that appealed to his own sense of justice. "Very well, Saint Jigun," the first elder conceded. "You will have your purge. Do not fail. The balance of the world is at stake." Jigun bowed, a picture of devout obedience. "The blasphemer's reign is at an end. I will deliver his head, and his power, to the throne of heaven." The lookout's cry from the cliffs of Amazon Lily was not a surprise. It was an inevitability they had been preparing for. Fleet sighted. Dozens of ships. Bearing the world government flag. The island became a hive of activity, but it was an organized, determined chaos. The plans Naruto and Hancock had made were put into motion. Non-combatants, the children, the elderly, the artisans, were moved into fortified shelters deep within the mountain city, their safety the paramount concern. The Kuja warriors, their faces grim but resolute, took their positions on the cliffs and in the dense jungle that surrounded the city. This was not a battle to be fought at sea. This was a defense of their home turf. Naruto and Hancock stood on the palace balcony, watching the horizon. It was worse than they'd imagined. It wasn't just a fleet. It was an armada. At least 30 marine warships formed a menacing crescent, but leading them was a larger, matte-black vessel that radiated a cold, deadening aura even from this distance, Jigun's flagship. Flanking it were smaller, faster ships crewed by soldiers in stark white uniforms, the Purifiers. He brought his personal army, Hancock breathed, her hand tightening on Naruto's arm. He's not planning on a naval bombardment, Naruto observed, his sage mode senses stretching out, analyzing the approaching force. They're preparing for a ground assault. He really is going to bring the fight here. His eyes narrowed as he detected something else. And he's brought toys. He could feel them, stored in the holds of the warships. Dozens of them. Large, humanoid figures that were not alive, yet pulsed with a strange, synthetic energy. They felt familiar. Cold, emotionless, powerful. Pacifistas. But his senses picked up something new about them, a subtle modification in their energy systems that seemed specifically designed to react to his own chakra. The fleet stopped just outside the effective range of the Kuja archers. There was no communication. No demands. No warnings. The assault began with brutal, terrifying efficiency. Landing craft, shielded by heavy armor, launched from the warships and sped towards the island's shores. Simultaneously, the Purifier ships fired a barrage, not of cannonballs, but of strange, dark projectiles that exploded into clouds of thick, black smoke. It's not poison, Naruto said, analyzing the substance with his senses. It's designed to block observation. He's trying to blind us. The smoke blanketed the coastline, obscuring the landing zones. It was a classic shinobi tactic, and Naruto felt a grim irony in it being used against him. He wants to get his troops on the ground before we can pick them off, Hancock deduced, her mind racing. Archers. Fire volley patterns into the smoke. Don't wait for a clear target. Hockey-infused arrows rained down into the black clouds, followed by the screams of the unlucky. But it wasn't enough. Thousands of Marines and white-clad Purifiers stormed the beaches under the cover of the smoke, fanning out into the dense jungle. The invasion of Amazon Lily had begun. What followed was brutal, close-quarters warfare. The jungle, which had always been the Kuja's greatest ally, became a nightmarish battlefield. The Kuja were masters of this terrain, using their snake bows and acrobatic agility to strike from the canopy, melting back into the foliage like ghosts. But they were outnumbered, and the Purifiers were no ordinary Marines. They fought with a cold, fanatical precision, their movements coordinated, their hockey strong. They were zealots, and they fought with the conviction of a holy crusade. Naruto and Hancock had to separate. She took command of the city's direct defense, a whirlwind of stone-inducing kicks and hockey-lace strikes, her presence a rallying point for her warriors. He became a ghost in the jungle, a one-man special forces unit. He moved faster than the eye could follow, a blur of orange and black. He didn't have time for non-lethal tactics now. The enemy was here, threatening his people. He used thousands of clones to engage the enemy on multiple fronts, turning the jungle into a bewildering maze where an entire platoon could be wiped out by an army that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. A group of Purifiers, thinking they had cornered a lone Kuja warrior, suddenly found themselves surrounded by a dozen Narutos. Before they could react, Razengans blossomed in their ranks, sending them flying. He was a force of chaos, sowing confusion and fear, his clones reporting enemy positions, strengths, and weaknesses back to him in a constant stream of information. He appeared behind a marine captain who was about to execute a captured Kuja. A single, precise chop to the neck, and the captain crumpled. Naruto freed the warrior. "Get back to the city. Warn them. The pacifistas have been deployed." He had seen them. The lumbering, bear-like giants were moving through the jungle, their mechanical footfalls crushing the undergrowth. They were systematically clearing paths, firing devastating laser beams from their mouths that vaporized ancient trees and any Kuja unfortunate enough to be caught in their path. And they were heading directly for the city. Jigun watched the battle unfold from the bridge of his ship, his expression as serene as a meditating monk. The monitors before him showed a chaotic mess of red icons, his forces, being systematically blinked out of existence by swarms of blue icons, Naruto's clones. He was losing hundreds of men. It didn't matter. "The subject is performing as predicted," he murmured. "He is everywhere, protecting everyone. He is expending enormous amounts of energy. The pacifista units are closing on the city's outer wall. Now, let's see how he handles a problem he can't solve with numbers." A new wave of pacifista units, 5 of them, were deployed directly into the city's outer plaza via a strange, air pressure launch system. They landed with thunderous crashes, bypassing the jungle war entirely. They immediately began their silent, soulless advance on the civilian shelters. Hancock and her royal guard met them head-on. She launched a perfume femur kick, a blast of heart-shaped energy that turned a section of the plaza to stone. It had no effect on the pacifista. Its laser sensors simply registered the attack as an inert object. It raised its hand to fire a laser beam. Sandersonia and Marigold intercepted it, their hockey-infused attacks denting its metallic shell but failing to stop its advance. The machine was a tank, impervious to their power. It swatted Marigold aside like a fly, sending her crashing into a building. "Hebeheim!" Sandersonia cried, as the pacifista's mouth began to glow, taking aim at the main shelter door, behind which thousands of Kuja were hiding. Hancock stared in horror. Her ultimate attacks were useless. Her strength was not enough. Suddenly, a massive, screaming shuriken made of pure wind, larger than a house, descended from the sky. It slammed into the pacifista, not with a cutting motion, but with the force of a bomb. The futon, Raisin shuriken detonated, and millions of microscopic wind blades shredded the automaton from the inside out, reducing it to a pile of scrap metal in a vortex of howling wind. Naruto landed in the center of the plaza, his face grim. He had been forced to abandon the jungle fight. Jigun had drawn him out. "Get everyone back. Now," he yelled. For more pacifistas were advancing, their lasers charging. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Naruto growled, looking up at the sky as if he could see Jigun watching. "You wanted to see the big guns. Fine." He clasped his hands together. Sage art, would release, deep forest emergence. The stone plaza cracked and split apart. Massive, writhing trees erupted from the ground, a forest born in an instant. The trees wrapped around the pacifistas, their wooden limbs as strong as steel, trapping them. But the machines were too strong. They began to tear their way free, their lasers burning through the sacred wood of the first Hokage. It wasn't enough. Jigun had planned for this. The pacifistas were just a distraction, a way to force Naruto to reveal his larger-scale jutsu. The real threat was Jigun himself. The oppressive aura descended upon the city once more. Naruto felt his connection to nature energy choke and sputter. The massive trees he had just created withered and died, crumbling into dust. He stumbled, gasping, the strength draining from his limbs. Jigun appeared on the city wall, looking down on the chaos with a dispassionate gaze. An impressive display, blasphemer. But all gardens must be weeded. The freed pacifistas renewed their advance. The Kuja warriors, their haki suppressed, could only watch in terror. Hancock, her devil fruit abilities gone, was just a strong woman against an army of steel. Naruto was on one knee, fighting the draining effect. He could feel Kurama raging within him, a caged titan beating against the bars of Jigen's power. Kit. He's not just blocking it. He's absorbing it. He's using our own power to fuel his technique. That was it. It wasn't just a nullification field. It was a siphon. Jigen was using Naruto's own immense energy reserves to power the very technique that was suppressing him. It was a perfect, parasitic loop. A pacifista raised its foot to crush a group of terrified children who had been caught outside the shelter. Something inside Naruto snapped. It wasn't a strategic decision. It wasn't a planned attack. It was a raw, primal roar of protective instinct. He would not let this happen. He would not let his new home, his new people, be destroyed by this monster. Kurama, he screamed in his mind. All of it. Now. He didn't try to fight the siphon. He did the opposite. He opened the floodgates. He let the full, untamed, infinite power of the nine-tailed fox, combined with the entirety of his six-paths sage mode energy, erupt from him in a single, cataclysmic burst. The world turned gold. An explosion of pure, benevolent chakra erupted from Naruto's body. It wasn't an attack. It was a statement. A son had just been born in the middle of Amazon Lily. The sheer, overwhelming volume of energy was more than Jigen's technique could handle. The parasitic loop shattered. The siphon didn't just break, it overloaded and backfired. On the city wall, Jigen cried out, a real cry of pain this time, as a torrent of golden energy, Naruto's energy, shot back into him. He was thrown from the wall, smoke pouring from his body. And in the center of the plaza, Naruto was gone. In his place stood something from a forgotten myth. A colossal avatar of golden, transparent energy, a titanic nine-tailed fox wrapped in a Susanoo-like suit of samurai armor. The Kurama avatar, in its full six paths glory, towered over the city, its size dwarfing the mountain itself. The sheer power radiating from it was biblical, a force that bent the light and warped the air. The Kuja, Hancock included, stared up at the golden god that had appeared in their midst, their minds completely broken by the scale of what they were witnessing. The pacifistas, programmed to attack, fired their lasers at the avatar. The beams splashed harmlessly against its golden hide like water from a squirt gun. The Kurama avatar didn't even seem to notice. It raised a colossal, armored hand. It formed a sphere of swirling, chaotic energy between its palms, a Rasengan the size of a battleship. This, Naruto's voice boomed, seeming to come from the heavens itself, is my power. He didn't throw the Rasengan. He simply slammed it down onto the plaza. The city of Amazon Lily vanished in a flash of white light. For a terrifying second, it seemed as though he had destroyed his own home. But as the light faded, the truth was revealed. The Rasengan hadn't been an attack. It had been a shield. A dome of pure, solid chakra now encased the entire city, a perfect, golden hemisphere that protected it from the outside world. The avatar then turned its attention to the sea. It raised its hand again. Nine-tailed beast bombs, condensed spheres of black, apocalyptic energy, formed at the mouths of its nine tails. They were aimed at the marine fleet. Jigen, clutching his chest on the beach below, his robes smoking, looked up in horror. His sensors were screaming, overloading. The data was pouring in, but the power level was incomprehensible. It was a singularity. A force not meant to exist in this reality. Fire, Naruto's voice commanded. The 9 black spheres of destruction shot across the sky. But they didn't hit the ships. They flew over them, striking the ocean miles behind the fleet. The sea itself screamed. 9 simultaneous, underwater nuclear detonations erupted, creating a tsunami of impossible scale. A solid wall of water, a kilometer high, rose from the ocean and crashed down upon the Marine Armada. Warships were snapped in two, crushed, and dragged into the abyss. The Purge Fleet, the pride of the world government, was annihilated in a single, world-ending act of environmental manipulation. In the ensuing chaos, a single purifier, a high-ranking officer, was washed ashore, unconscious but alive. The Kurama avatar stood for a moment longer, a golden god surveying its work. Then, it dissolved, the golden light receding back into the small figure of Naruto Uzumaki, who stood panting in the center of the now protected city. On the beach, Jigun looked at the utter devastation of his fleet. He looked at the golden dome protecting the island. He had wanted to see Naruto's power. He had. And it was more beautiful and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. His plan had worked perfectly. His body was damaged, his army was gone, but the data had been captured. He pulled a small device from his robes. It was a Vivre card, pointing towards Mary Geos. He smiled, a broken, bloody expression of pure, fanatical triumph. He had what he needed. The God Slayer would have its feast. Chapter 6, The Price of Freedom. The golden dome of chakra that encased Amazon Lily did not vanish. It remained, a silent, shimmering testament to the power that had been unleashed. Inside its protective embrace, a stunned silence reigned. The battle was over. The invading fleet was a collection of splintered matchsticks being swallowed by a wrathful sea. The enemy soldiers still on the island were cut off, leaderless, and surrounded. But no one was cheering. The Kuja warriors stood frozen, their eyes wide, staring at the spot where the colossal golden god had stood. They had revered Naruto for his strength, admired him for his kindness, but what they had just witnessed transcended all of that. It was not the power of a man, or even a king. It was a force of creation and destruction on a planetary scale. They had made a god their emperor. The realization was as terrifying as it was awe-inspiring. Hancock was on her knees, not from weakness, but because her legs could no longer support the weight of what she had seen. Her mind, which had grappled with the concepts of admirals and emperors, could not find a category for what Naruto was. He hadn't just defeated an army, he had commanded the very elements to erase it. And then, with that same apocalyptic power, he had shielded them, cradling their entire city in a hand of pure light. The sheer, breathtaking dichotomy of his power, the ability to annihilate and the will to protect, left her speechless. Naruto himself was on one knee in the center of the plaza, his head bowed, his breathing ragged. The explosive release of that much power, followed by the sustained control needed to maintain the dome, had taken a toll. It wasn't exhaustion of chakra, his reserves, backed by Kurama, were functionally limitless, but the mental and spiritual strain was immense. He could feel the thousands of heartbeats within the city, the fear, the shock, the awe. He had saved them, but he had also revealed the monster within him. He waited for the inevitable recoil, the fear he had known his entire childhood. He pushed himself to his feet. The city was a mess. Buildings were damaged from the initial pacifista assault, and dozens of Kuja warriors were injured, casualties of the brutal jungle fighting before he had intervened. The victory felt hollow, paid for with the blood and pain of his people. His people. The thought solidified in his mind. They were his to protect. He didn't bask in the silence. He moved. His first stop was the makeshift infirmary that had been set up in the main temple. It was a scene of controlled chaos. Healers were rushing between cots, tending to burns, broken bones, and deep lacerations. The air was thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and blood. Naruto walked into the room, and the bustling activity stuttered to a halt. The wounded, the healers, they all stared at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He ignored their gazes and knelt beside the first cot. The warrior on it, a young woman named Aphilandra, had a vicious gash on her leg, deep and poorly stitched in the heat of battle. It was festering, a dark anger spreading through the muscle. He placed his hands over the wound. A soft, gentle green light, the color of new spring leaves, emanated from his palms. It was not the overwhelming gold of the Kyubi, but the quiet, potent energy of his six paths yang power, the creation of all things. The young woman gasped as a soothing warmth spread through her leg. The healers watched, mesmerized, as the torn flesh began to knit itself back together before their eyes. The ugly wound closed, the inflammation receded, and in moments, the skin was smooth and unblemished, leaving not even a scar. Naruto moved to the next cot. And the next. He moved through the infirmary like a silent, determined specter of life. He mended broken bones with a touch, purged infections with a wave of his hand, and restored vitality to the grievously wounded. He didn't speak. He just worked, his face a mask of intense concentration, his actions a quiet apology for not being able to protect them from harm in the first place. This act, more than the colossal avatar, was what truly broke through their fear. The golden god had been terrifying and remote. This was personal. This was intimate. This was the same power, scaled down to a gentle, life-giving touch. He was not a monster. He was a healer. He was their emperor, tending to his people. The fear in their eyes was replaced by a profound, tearful gratitude. They were not just his subjects, they were his children, and he was their guardian. Hancock had followed him into the infirmary. She stood in the doorway, watching him. She saw the way his brow was furrowed in concentration, the gentleness of his hands, the way he looked at each warrior not as a casualty, but as a person he had failed. Guilt, sharp and overwhelming, pierced through her. This was her fault. She had brought him here. She had crowned him emperor. She had made her island a target for the world's most powerful organization. These women were wounded, their home was scarred, because of her decision. The weight of her crown had never felt so heavy. She turned and fled, unable to bear the sight of his quiet, determined penance. She ran through the palace, up the winding stairs to the highest point of the island, a secluded precipice that overlooked the vast expanse of the calm belt. It was her sanctuary, the one place she went when the burdens of being an empress became too much. She stood at the edge, the wind whipping her hair, her gaze fixed on the wreckage of the enemy fleet being consumed by the sea. They had won. It was a victory more decisive than any in the history of the Kuja. So why did it feel like a defeat? Why did her heart feel like a lead weight in her chest? A warm presence appeared behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. He had finished his work. "They're all stable," Naruto said softly, his voice carrying on the wind. "No one else will die today. Because of you," she whispered, her voice tight. "They were injured because of me, and they live because of you. I put them in danger, and you saved them. Some empress I am. You're the reason they had a home to fight for," he countered, stepping to her side. He wasn't looking at her, but out at the sea. "You're the reason they're strong. You're the reason they stood their ground instead of breaking. I just ended the fight. You ended it by becoming a force that could crack the planet in half," she shot back, turning to face him, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and self-loathing. "I saw it. Naruto. I saw the power you wield. You talk of peace and understanding, but you hold the power of absolute destruction in your hands. How can you live with that? How can you not be terrified of what you are?" Naruto met her fiery gaze, his own eyes calm and deep, like the sea after a storm. "I used to be," he admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "When I was a kid, I was terrified of it. It was a monster locked in a cage inside me, and all I wanted was for it to be gone. But it's a part of me. It's not a monster. It's just power. Kurama is my partner, not my prisoner. The power isn't good or evil, Hancock. It's what you choose to do with it that matters." He took a step closer, his presence a comforting warmth against the cold wind. "Today, I chose to protect this island. I chose to save our people. Yes, the power I used was terrifying. But it's the price of freedom. Sometimes, to protect the things you love, you have to be willing to become the monster your enemies think you are. You have to show them that their cage isn't strong enough to hold you. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. These scars, on the island, on our people, they aren't a mark of your failure. They're a symbol of what we're willing to endure to be free. It's a price I've paid my whole life. And I would pay it again, right now, to protect you and this place. His words, his touch, his unwavering belief in her, it shattered the last of her defenses. He wasn't blaming her. He was standing with her, sharing the burden. He wasn't a god passing judgment, he was a man, her partner, seeing her pain and offering not pity, but solidarity. It's not just a duty anymore, is it? He murmured, his blue eyes searching hers. Protecting this place. Protecting you. It's given me a new home. A new purpose. I think, he hesitated, the confident hero suddenly looking vulnerable. I think I'm falling in love with you, Boa Hancock. The confession hung in the air, simple, honest, and more powerful than any tailed beast bomb. It was the final key, the one that unlocked the last, most heavily guarded chamber of her heart. The gratitude, the admiration, the fierce, protective feelings she had for him, they all coalesced into a single, brilliant truth. She loved him. She, who had despised all men, who had believed love was a weakness, was in love with this impossible, kind-hearted, terrifyingly powerful man. She didn't answer with words. She surged forward, her arms wrapping around his neck, and kissed him. This kiss was different from the last. It wasn't born of adrenaline and fear. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep acceptance. It was a kiss of shared burdens and a shared future. It was quiet, and it was certain. It was the sealing of a pact, an alliance not of kingdoms, but of hearts. When they finally broke apart, they simply held each other, watching the sun begin to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The war was far from over. Their greatest enemy was still out there, plotting. But for the first time, Hancock did not feel like she was facing it alone. They were an emperor and an empress. A fox and a serpent. And they would face the coming night together. The ripples of the Siege of the Lily spread across the world with the speed of a tsunami. Momonga's report had been shocking enough, but this was on another level entirely. The world government tried to suppress the story, but it was impossible. Too many rogue sailors and underworld observers in the calm belt had witnessed the Golden God, the Dome of Light, and the apocalyptic tidal wave that had erased an entire purge fleet. The news lit a fire in the shadows. In a hidden base on a stark, white island, a man with a dragon tattoo on his face read the report, a grim smile playing on his lips. Monkey D. Dragon, the world's most wanted man and leader of the Revolutionary Army, saw not just a new power, but a kindred spirit. This Naruto. Uzumaki's actions were not those of a mere pirate carving out territory. They were the actions of a liberator. His mercy towards Momonga's fleet, followed by the absolute destruction of the elite purge fleet, painted a clear picture. This was a man who would not strike the first blow, but who would end the fight with unquestionable finality. He is an ideologue with the power of an emperor, Sabo, Dragon's second-in-command, said, looking over his shoulder at the report. He is exactly what we need. Dragon nodded. He and the pirate empress have declared war on the world nobles. Their goals align with ours, even if their methods are more direct. He turned to one of his commanders. Koala, prepare a formal communiqué. No spies, no intermediaries. A direct, personal message from me to the rulers of Amazon Lily. It is time we made a formal introduction. A potential alliance of this magnitude could shift the balance of the entire world. The news reached other ears as well. On a small, peaceful island in the New World, Marco the Phoenix, former first commander of the Whitebeard pirates, read the newspaper with a weary but hopeful eye. Since the death of Whitebeard, his family had been scattered, hunted. They lacked a center, a purpose. This story, of a new emperor who fought to protect his home, who wielded a power that seemed to heal as much as it destroyed, it reminded him of his old captain's dream of a family. The will of Whitebeard was not dead. Perhaps it had found a new vessel. He made a decision. It was time to reach out. The world was beginning to choose sides. Amazon Lily was no longer just a remote island of warrior women. It was becoming a symbol. A beacon of defiance. A new pole in the global power struggle, drawing the disillusioned, the rebellious, and the hopeful into its orbit. But as the forces of rebellion began to stir, the forces of order were consolidating their own power. In a dark, sterile laboratory deep beneath Mary Geos, Saint Jigun, his arm in a sling and his face pale from the backlash of Naruto's power, oversaw the final stages of his master plan. The data from the siege, a torrent of incomprehensible energy readings from the Kurama avatar, was being fed into a massive, obsidian sarcophagus that hummed with a malevolent, void-like energy. The energy patterns are integrating, a scientist in a lab coat reported, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. The Godslayer's matrix is adapting. It is learning the very frequency of his soul. Jigun smiled, a pained but triumphant expression. He thinks he won. He thinks his monstrous display of power saved him. The fool. He did nothing but hand me the bullets for the gun I will put to his head. A second discovery from the battle was brought to his attention. The captured purifier officer, the one who had washed ashore on Amazon Lily, had been interrogated. My lord, the subject used some kind of mental persuasion, the attending scientist reported, looking at his notes. He did not torture the officer for information. He talked to him. He showed him empathy. He spoke of understanding and shared pain. It was a psychological attack of unprecedented sophistication. The officer revealed everything about our operation. About the Godslayer. Jigun's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, wider and more terrifying than before. Excellent, he breathed. Even better. Let them know. Let them know that their doom is coming. Let them feel the walls closing in. Let them know that there is a weapon designed specifically to unmake them. Let them exhaust themselves trying to find it, to stop it. He turned to the obsidian sarcophagus, placing a hand on its cold surface. It felt like touching absolute zero. The hunt is over. Now, the execution begins. He will not wait for us to come to him again. He will come to us. And this gilded cage will be ready for him. The plan had shifted. It was no longer about drawing Naruto out. It was about luring him in. The most sacred, heavily guarded place in the world, the holy land of Mary Geos itself, was about to become the ultimate trap. Chapter 7, The Gilded Cage. The dome of golden chakra dissipated at dawn, melting away like a morning mist to reveal a city buzzing with a new, determined energy. The fear from the siege was gone, burned away by Naruto's actions and replaced with a fierce, almost fanatical loyalty. The Kuja warriors trained with a new intensity, their hockey-infused arrows whistling through the jungle. They were no longer just defending an island, they were defending an ideal, personified by their two rulers. But within the palace, the mood was far from celebratory. The interrogation of the captured purifier officer, conducted by Naruto himself, had cast a long, dark shadow over their victory. Naruto hadn't used torture or intimidation. He'd simply sat with the man, a zealot named Commander Valerius, and spoken to him. He'd used his unique ability to sense emotions, to touch the core of the man's being, to understand the fanaticism that drove him. He'd spoken of his own past, of fighting for a cause he believed in, and slowly, painstakingly, he had built a bridge of understanding. Valerius, his fanaticism cracked by Naruto's genuine empathy and the horrifying display of power he had witnessed, had confessed everything. He spoke of Saint Jigun's obsession, of the data collection, and of the ultimate goal, a weapon codenamed the Godslayer. It's not a cannon or a bomb, Naruto explained grimly to Hancock, her sisters, and Elder Nyan in the war room. The captured officer was now being held in comfortable but secure quarters, a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. Valerius described it as an ancient artifact, something from the void century, that Jigun's family has been guarding for generations. Jigun's devil fruit, the Chikara no Mi, is the key to activating it. It's not just a weapon, it's a nullification engine. It's designed to project Jigun's power on a global scale, to erase a specific energy signature from existence. My energy signature, Naruto finished, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Hancock's face was pale. He tricked you. The entire siege, he wasn't trying to win. He was goading you, forcing you to use your full power so his weapon could get a lock on you. He succeeded, Naruto admitted, a cold anger in his voice. He had been played. His desire to protect the island had been used as the very tool to forge the weapon of his own destruction. And it gets worse. According to Valerius, to complete the final calibration, the weapon requires a live, powerful energy source to test its resonant frequency. Jigun didn't just retreat to Mary Geos. He took a prisoner. Elder Nyan, who had been listening with a grim expression, finally spoke. Who? Valerius didn't know the name, Naruto said. Just that it was a high-ranking captive. Someone important enough for Jigun to use as his final tuning fork before turning the weapon on me. The silence in the room was heavy. They were on a clock. Every moment they waited, Jigun was one step closer to perfecting a weapon that could kill Naruto, and without him, Amazon Lily would be defenseless against the full, vengeful might of the world government. Then we must find this weapon and destroy it, Marigold stated, her voice a low rumble. It is in Mary Geos, Sandersonia hissed. The Holy Land. The heart of the world government. A frontal assault is impossible. It is the most heavily fortified place in the world. Which is exactly what they expect us to think, Naruto said, a dangerous glint in his eye. They're waiting for us to gather our new allies, to form a grand fleet and attack their fortress. They want a big, glorious war. He walked to the map of the world, his finger tapping the small, central point of the red line. We're not going to give it to them. Hancock looked at him, her mind already racing along the same audacious path. You're proposing a stealth mission. I'm proposing we walk in through the front door, Naruto corrected. Not as an army. As a handful of ghosts. We'll infiltrate Mary Geos, rescue the prisoner, and destroy that weapon before they even know we're there. It's insane. It's impossible. And it's the only chance we have. A heated debate erupted. Elder Nyan called the plan suicidal. Marigold and Sandersonia, while brave, were terrified at the prospect of returning to the place of their enslavement. But Hancock silenced them all. He is right, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. It is the only way. And he will not go alone. She looked at Naruto, her gaze unwavering. I am going with you. Hancock, no, Naruto immediately protested. That place, for you, it's too much to ask. You did not ask, she retorted, her chin held high. I am telling you. You may be the emperor, but I am still the empress of this island. And you are a shinobi, a master of stealth, but you know nothing of that place. I do. I know its layout. I know the way the nobles think, the way the guards move. I know their arrogance, their blindness. My knowledge will be your best weapon. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only he could hear. And you are my partner. I will not let you face the source of my nightmares alone. Her sisters, seeing the unbreakable resolve in her eyes and shamed by their own fear, immediately voiced their support. We will go too, Sandersonia declared. We are the Gorgon sisters. We face our fears together. Our stealth skills are second to none, and our devil fruit abilities, if we can use them, are perfect for infiltration. Naruto looked at the three of them, the Empress and her two most loyal warriors, willing to walk back into the hell of their past for him, for their future. His heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride. He nodded slowly. All right. But we do this my way. We get in, we get the objective, and we get out. The moment it gets too hot, we retreat. No heroics. No unnecessary risks. As they were planning, a new piece of intelligence arrived, one that solidified their decision. It was the communique from Monkey D. Dragon, delivered by a revolutionary flock of birds trained to navigate the calm belt. The message was concise and direct, proposing an alliance and offering a critical piece of information as a sign of goodwill. It confirmed the existence of the God Slayer and, more importantly, it gave them a name. The prisoner Jigun had taken was one of their own, Bartholomew Kuma. A former warlord and a secret commander in the Revolutionary Army, he had been turned into a mindless cyborg slave for the celestial dragons. His formidable power and unique body made him the perfect test subject. The message ended with a chilling piece of intel. According to Dragon sources, the final test was scheduled to take place in 3 days. The clock was ticking. 2 days later, a small, unassuming fishing boat drifted towards the massive red cliffs of the Red Line. It was a vessel Naruto had created with wood release, designed to be unremarkable, a piece of flotsam in the vast ocean. On board were Naruto, Hancock, Sandersonia, and Marigold, all disguised in simple traveler's cloaks. Getting to the top of the 10,000-meter-high continent was their first obstacle. A frontal climb was impossible. Instead, they used the official route, the Bondola system, a network of giant, bubble-like elevators that carried ships up to the Holy City. Posing as merchants delivering rare goods, a lie made believable by Hancock's perfect, arrogant portrayal of a minor noblewoman, they were granted passage. The ride up was tense. As they ascended, the world fell away, and the sheer, unnatural scale of the Red Line became apparent. It was a wall that split the world in two, a monument to a power so great it could reshape the planet. Arriving in Mary Geos was like stepping into a twisted fairy tale. The city was beautiful, immaculate, a paradise of manicured gardens, pristine white towers, and bubbling fountains. The air was clean, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. But beneath the polished veneer, there was a profound sickness. Naruto's sage mode was a curse here. He could feel the rot at the city's core. He could feel the heartbeats of the slaves, a constant, terrified thrum of misery. He saw world nobles walking, their fishmen slaves in ponds, he saw them riding on the backs of crawling humans, he saw the casual, bored cruelty that was the very fabric of their existence. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to intervene, to unleash his power and burn this corrupt paradise to the ground. Hancock's hand found his, her grip like steel. He looked at her and saw the immense effort it was taking her to remain composed. Her face was a marble mask, but her eyes were dark with remembered trauma. She was reliving her own personal hell, yet her focus was on him, on keeping his righteous fury in check. Her strength grounded him. He clenched his jaw, forced his anger down, and nodded. The mission comes first. They moved through the city like shadows, using the routes Hancock remembered from her childhood nightmares, alleyways and service tunnels hidden from the noble's sight. Sandersonia and Marigold proved their worth, their serpentine senses and brute strength allowing them to neutralize guards silently and bypass security checkpoints. Their target was the Pangea Castle, the heart of the city, where the 5 elders resided and where, according to Dragon's intel, the God Slayer was being held in a sub-level laboratory. Infiltrating the castle itself was the true test. Naruto created a microscopic scout clone, no bigger than a fly, and sent it ahead. Through its eyes, he mapped the interior, the guard patrols, the energy signatures. He found what they were looking for, a hidden elevator, descending into the bedrock beneath the castle. And he found something else. A presence. At the very top of the castle, in a room that seemed to be shielded from all forms of observation, he felt a flicker of an energy signature that made his blood run cold. It was ancient, vast, and achingly familiar. It felt like a sliver of Kagaya's power, but colder, emptier, twisted into something unnatural. It was Imu. He couldn't see the being, but he could feel its gaze sweeping over the city, a lazy, omniscient god watching its garden. The feeling was so oppressive that Naruto's scout clone dissolved from the sheer psychic pressure. He relayed the information to the others in a hushed whisper. The Real King is here. It's watching. The knowledge added a new layer of terrifying urgency to their mission. They reached the hidden elevator, bypassing the guards with a combination of Hancock's feigned noble authority and Naruto's subtle genjutsu, a simple trick of the light that made the guards' eyes slide right past them. The descent was long and silent. The elevator opened into a sterile, white corridor, humming with a low, malevolent energy. This was the place. They could feel it. At the end of the hall was a massive, vault-like door guarded by two of Jigun's elite purifiers. There was no time for subtlety now. Before the guards could even register their presence, Marigold and Sandersonia moved. They were a blur of green and black, a python and a giantess, their attacks perfectly coordinated. The guards were dispatched in seconds, unconscious but alive. Naruto placed his hand on the vault door. It was made of a material he didn't recognize, dense and cold, designed to absorb energy. I can't break it without bringing the whole castle down on us, he said. Allow me, Hancock said. She stepped forward and, to Naruto's surprise, she didn't try to kick it. She placed her hand on a small, almost invisible control panel. She remembered the sequence. With trembling fingers, she pressed a series of symbols. A hiss of hydraulics, and the massive door slid open. The room beyond was a cathedral of horrors. In the center, floating in a web of crackling, dark energy, was the Godslayer. It was an obsidian sarcophagus, its surface carved with runes that seemed to drink the light from the room. It hummed with the void-like power of Jigun's devil fruit. Wires and conduits snaked from it, connecting it to a series of consoles manned by terrified-looking scientists. And chained before it, serving as its focal point, was the giant, silent form of Bartholomew Kuma. His body was riddled with new cybernetics, his eyes were blank, and a stream of pure energy was being forcibly siphoned from him into the Godslayer. So, a calm voice echoed from the far side of the chamber. The mice have come for the cheese. Saint Jigun stepped out from behind a massive console, a serene smile on his face. He was not surprised. He was waiting. The room was an obvious trap. You knew we were coming, Naruto stated, stepping forward, his body tensing for a fight. Of course, Jigun said with a condescending chuckle. Your psychological profile is laughably predictable. A damsel in distress, a ticking clock, you could not resist. It is the flaw of the hero archetype. He gestured around the room. Welcome to my sanctuary. The crucible where your messy, chaotic existence will be refined into a single, perfect point of annihilation. Your plan is over, Jigun, Hancock spat, her voice filled with venom. We're here. We will destroy your machine and free Kuma. Destroy it? Jigun laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. My dear pirate empress, you misunderstand. This is not a weapon to be fought. It is a concept. It is a law of nature I am simply enforcing. Your emperor, here is a disruption to the natural order. A discordant note. The Godslayer does not fire a bullet. It merely erases the note. It restores the silence. The perfect, divine silence of my God's world. He turned his gaze to Naruto, his eyes burning with the cold fire of a zealot. You fight for freedom, Uzumaki. A noble, idiotic cause. I have seen the annals of history. I have seen what humanity does with its freedom. War. Famine. Greed. Cruelty. They are flawed, broken creatures who crave a firm, divine hand. They need a god to rule them, to protect them from themselves. Your belief in their potential, in free will, it is a childish fantasy. Forcing people to obey isn't peace, Naruto countered, his voice low and dangerous, echoing the words he had spoken to Hancock on their ship. That's a cage. And I've spent my whole life breaking cages. A beautiful sentiment, Jigun sighed. Let's see how it holds up when you no longer have the power to back it up. He raised his hand. The entire laboratory pulsed with his power. The air grew thick, and the oppressive, nullifying aura descended, far stronger than it had been on the ship. It was amplified by the God Slayer itself. Naruto felt his connection to Sage Mode and Kurama wither and die instantly. Hancock and her sisters cried out as their Haki and Devil Fruit powers were snuffed out like candles. They were reduced to ordinary, powerless women in the heart of their enemy's stronghold. But Naruto was still standing. He wasn't a god anymore. He wasn't even a Jinchuriki. But he was still a shinobi trained by Jiraiya, a warrior who had fought in a world war. He fell back on his most basic, fundamental skills. He threw a handful of shuriken. Jigun simply waved a hand, and the metal projectiles stopped in mid-air, stripped of their kinetic energy, and fell to the floor with a clatter. You see, Jigun said sadly. Without your divine spark, you are just a man. And men are so very easy to break. He gestured, and a dozen purifiers, who had been hidden in alcoves in the walls, stepped out, their weapons raised. The situation was hopeless. They were depowered, surrounded, and facing the man who could unmake them. Hancock looked at the blank, enslaved face of Kuma. She looked at the sneering, confident face of Jigun. She looked at Naruto, who stood before her, still defiant, even with his power stripped away. And she made a choice. She would not be a damsel. She would not be a victim. She was the pirate empress. Naruto, she yelled, and in that single word, she conveyed a whole plan, a desperate gamble born of their shared understanding. She did something no one expected. She ran, not away from Jigun, but towards him, screaming a warrior's cry. It was a suicide charge. Jigun smiled. Predictable. He raised a hand to swat her aside. But her charge was a feint. At the last second, she dropped, sliding across the polished floor. Her target wasn't Jigun. It was the main console controlling the energy flow from Kuma to the Godslayer. She slammed her body into it with all her might. Sparks flew. Alarms blared. The scientists shrieked in panic. The flow of energy to the Godslayer flickered. In that split second of disruption, Naruto felt a trickle. A single, tiny thread of his power returned. It was enough. With a speed that was still inhuman, he made a single-hand sign. A clone appeared, not to fight, but to act as a relay. He poured every ounce of the returned power into one, desperate technique. He didn't target Jigun. He didn't target the guards. He targeted Bartholomew Kuma. He placed his hand on the back of the silent giant's head. It wasn't an attack. It was a connection. He pushed his own consciousness, his own memories, his own unwavering belief in freedom, directly into Kuma's mind. It was talk no jutsu, weaponized. You are not a slave. You are a revolutionary. A father. A hero. Wake up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Bartholomew Kuma's head twitched. His blank eyes flickered. A single word escaped his lips, a voice not heard in years. Freedom. And then, Kuma's own power, the pawpaw fruit, roared back to life, no longer suppressed by Jigun's control. He raised his hand and slammed his palm into his own chest. A massive, glowing paw-print bubble of pure, concentrated pain and suffering, all the pain he had endured as a slave, was ejected from his body. And with a single, defiant roar, he pushed the bubble of agony directly into the Godslayer. The obsidian sarcophagus had been calibrated to absorb Naruto's energy. It was not prepared for this. It was not prepared for a conceptual attack, an injection of pure, unadulterated suffering. The machine shrieked, a high-pitched, metallic scream of agony. The dark energy flared, the runes glowed white-hot, and with a cataclysmic crack, the God-Slayer began to overload. Jigun screamed in fury and disbelief. No. Impossible. The laboratory was coming apart. Consoles exploded. The ceiling began to collapse. Time to go. Naruto yelled, grabbing Hancock's hand. Kuma, his purpose served, slumped forward, a single tear tracking down his face before his eyes went blank once more. Sandersonia and Marigold grabbed him, hauling his massive frame towards the door. As they fled, Naruto glanced back at the heart of the chaos. He saw Jigun, not trying to escape, but trying desperately to contain the overloading weapon, his body wreathed in black, void-like energy. And as a section of the ceiling fell away, Naruto saw past the laboratory, past the castle foundations, and into the earth below. He saw a vast, dark chamber. And in it, he saw a glimpse of Imu. The silhouetted figure was standing, not in panic, but in cold, ancient rage. And behind Imu, Naruto saw what the being was guarding. Not a throne. Not a weapon. It was a tree. A colossal, pale, dying tree, eerily similar to the god tree of his own world, its roots seeming to spread out beneath the entire planet. The God-Slayer detonated. The explosion was silent, a wave of pure null energy that erased the lab, Jigun, and a huge chunk of the Pangaea castle from existence. The shockwave sent them flying down the corridor, but they were alive. They had done it. They had survived. But as they raced to escape the collapsing castle, Naruto couldn't shake the image from his mind. The dying tree. The rage of an ancient god. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This wasn't about overthrowing a government anymore. This was about saving a world from a primordial parasite that had its roots sunk deep into the planet's heart. Chapter 8, Emperor of the Dawn. The escape from Mary Geos was a desperate, chaotic sprint through the heart of a dying god's paradise. The silent, void-like implosion of the God-Slayer had not been a conventional blast, but it had sent a seismic shockwave through the foundations of Pangaea Castle. Alarms blared across the holy city, a discordant symphony of panic. The pristine white walls of the castle cracked and groaned, raining dust and debris down upon the pristine gardens. The sky, once a perfect, artificial blue, seemed to flicker. Naruto led the charge, his powers flooding back in a torrential rush now that Jigun's nullifying presence was erased from reality. He created a protective shell of chakra around his small group as they ran, deflecting falling chunks of marble. Hancock was at his side, her eyes blazing with adrenaline, while Sandersonia and Marigold hauled the massive, inert form of Bartholomew Kuma between them, their strength taxed to its limit. They didn't fight their way out. They ran. Guards and nobles alike were in a state of pandemonium, unable to comprehend the attack on their sacred, untouchable home. The group used the chaos as cover, a river of desperation flowing through a city that had never known fear. As they reached the Bondola elevators, Naruto glanced back at the wounded Pangaea castle. His sage mode was screaming, not with the pinpointed threat of an enemy, but with a vast, ambient rage that was pressing down on the entire city. It was Imu. The ancient being's fury was a palpable, suffocating pressure, the anger of a deity whose sanctum had been violated. Naruto could feel its gaze. Sweeping across the chaos, a predator searching for the insects that had disturbed its nest. Hurry, he urged, pushing them into a descending bubble. It knows we're here. The moment the Bondola cleared the red line and began its descent to the sea below, a shadow fell over them. Naruto looked up. A figure was standing on the edge of the red line, 10,000 meters above, looking down at them. It was a silhouette against the sky, one of the 5 elders, the one with the sword. Even from this impossible distance, Naruto could feel the sheer, condensed power of his haki, a focused blade of intent aimed directly at them. The elder drew his sword. It was one of the legendary supreme grade blades, appear to Mihawk's Yoru. He didn't leap. He didn't fire a projectile. He simply slashed. A flying blade attack, just like Mihawk's, but different. It was larger, faster, and infused with a cold, political fury. It was not the slash of a duelist seeking a challenge, but the slash of an executioner dispensing a sentence. It tore through the air, aimed to cleave their bandola in two and send them plummeting into the sea. There was no time to dodge. Naruto reacted on pure instinct. He thrust his hands forward, a dense, golden shield of Kurama's chakra appearing before them. The shield, which could have withstood a volley of cannonballs, shattered like glass on impact. The elder's slash was a force of nature. But the shield had done its job. It had slowed the attack by a fraction of a second. Naruto used that split second. He grabbed Hancock, her sisters, and Kuma, wrapping them in his chakra, and used his own body to absorb the rest of the attack. The world-class slash hit him like a physical manifestation of absolute authority. Pain, sharp and blinding, erupted across his chest as the hockey-infused blade cut deep, bypassing his normal durability. He was thrown back, the force of the blow sending their bandola careening wildly. Naruto! Hancock screamed, her heart seizing as she saw the deep, bleeding gash across his chest. He gritted his teeth, the wound already starting to steam as Kurama's chakra worked to heal it. "I'm okay," he grunted, his voice tight with pain. "Just, stronger than I thought." They landed at the base of the red line, their purloined fishing boat miraculously intact. They scrambled aboard and pushed off, Naruto pouring chakra into the vessel to propel it away at impossible speeds. They had done the impossible. They had struck the heart of the world government and escaped with their lives. But the wound Naruto carried was a stark reminder of the power they had challenged. They had not defeated the world government. They had merely, and violently, rung the bell for the main event. The news of the attack on Mary Geos, an event the world government couldn't possibly hide, was an earthquake that shook the entire planet. The idea that the Holy Land was not inviolable, that the celestial dragons were not untouchable, was a spark thrown into a global powder keg. Rebellions, once simmering in dark corners, ignited into open flames on a dozen islands. The Revolutionary Army, emboldened, launched a series of coordinated, devastating strikes against key government facilities. The world, held in a fragile, 800-year-old balance, began to tilt. But Imu and the five elders did not respond with panic. They responded with a cold, calculated, and utterly terrifying display of power. A message was broadcast across the globe, on every screen, on every den mushi. It was the face of the fleet admiral, Sakazuki, his expression carved from stone and magma. Behind him was a live feed of a peaceful, prosperous kingdom in the New World, the island of Dressrosa, a nation that had only recently thrown off the yoke of a corrupt warlord and was just beginning to rebuild. Sakazuki's voice was a low, volcanic rumble that promised nothing but annihilation. The world has witnessed an act of unparalleled terrorism against the holy land of Mary Geos, perpetrated by the pirates of Amazon Lily and their blasphemous emperor, Naruto Uzumaki. This defiance will not be tolerated. Justice must be absolute. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. However, the world government is merciful. The utter destruction of Amazon Lily can be avoided. A final chance for redemption is offered. The screen shifted, showing a massive, black, floating fortress, a weapon that no one had ever seen before, hovering in the sky above Dressrosa. It was a terrifying fusion of sea stone, strange technology, and a dark, pulsating energy that seemed to absorb the very light around it. It was the God Slayer, or what was left of it, rebuilt, repurposed, and mobile. Jigun was gone, but his work, and his will, remained. Naruto Uzumaki, Sakazuki's voice boomed, now addressing Naruto directly, wherever he was. You will surrender yourself to the world government for public execution. You will turn yourself in at the coordinates of the G-1 Marine base within 24 hours. If you fail to appear, the weapon you see before you will be unleashed. The island of Dressrosa, and its millions of innocent citizens, will be erased from the map. The choice is yours, Emperor. Your life, or theirs. The broadcast ended. The ultimatum was delivered. The world held its breath. On the deck of the Perfume Yuta, sailing back to Amazon Lily, Naruto, Hancock, and the others watched the message with horrified silence. The gash on Naruto's chest was now just a faint, pink line, but the memory of the pain was fresh. "It's a trap," Hancock said instantly, her voice shaking with rage. "A monstrous, despicable trap. They will execute you, and then they will destroy Dressrosa anyway. They only want to break your image as a savior before they kill you." "She's right," Marguerite added, her face pale. "You cannot go. It is suicide." Naruto stared at the blank screen, his face unreadable. He could feel it. The heartbeats of millions of people on Dressrosa, a symphony of terror and despair. They were hostages in a war they had no part in. It was Jigen's philosophy, taken to its horrifying conclusion. He wants to save everyone. So, we will force him to choose. "They're not just trying to kill me," Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They're trying to kill hope. They want the world to see me either abandon innocent people to die, or surrender and be executed like a common criminal. Either way, the symbol of defiance that is Amazon Lily is shattered." He closed his eyes. He saw the faces of the children on Dressrosa, the families, the people just trying to live their lives. He saw the face of the man on Sabaody he had saved, the father protecting his daughter. He saw the faces of the Kuja warriors he had healed. His path had always been clear. He had never once, in his entire life, abandoned someone he could save. He opened his eyes. They were calm, clear, and filled with an unshakable resolve. "Set a course for G-1, he said. "Naruto, no." Hancock grabbed his arm, her eyes wild with panic. "You cannot. I forbid it. As Empress of Amazon Lily, I forbid you from sacrificing yourself." He turned and took her hands in his. His grip was gentle but firm. "And as Emperor of Amazon Lily, I have a duty to protect the innocent, not just the ones on our island, but everywhere. Hancock, listen to me. This isn't a sacrifice. It's a declaration. They think they've given me an impossible choice. They're wrong. They've given me a stage." He looked around at the worried faces of the Kuja. "They want a public execution. Fine. They'll get a public spectacle. They want to show the world the fall of a false emperor. I'll show them the dawn of a real one." His confidence was infectious, a fire that burned away their fear. Hancock looked into his eyes and saw no hint of doubt. He had a plan. A terrifying, insane, Naruto-esque plan. She squeezed his hands, her fear transmuting into a fierce, unwavering trust. "Then we go with you." "No," Naruto said, his voice softening. "I need you to do something more important. I need you to rally our allies." He handed her a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "This is a communication clone. It's linked directly to me. When the time is right, I'll send the signal. I need you to be the commander of our fleet. The revolutionaries, Marco, the others who have reached out, bring them. I'll be the lightning rod. You be the storm that follows." 24 hours later, the world was watching. Billions of people were gathered around broadcast screens, their lives on hold. At the G-1 Marine base, a massive platform had been erected. Atop it stood Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, flanked by two other admirals, Fujitora, the blind swordsman with his hand on his blade, his face a mask of grim conflict, and Ryukujiu, his arrogant smirk a stark contrast. An army of vice-admirals and thousands of marines stood at attention. And then, he appeared. A single golden speck in the sky, descending slowly. Naruto landed on the platform, alone, his hands empty, his expression serene. He was not in chains. He was not a prisoner. He had come of his own free will. A wave of murmurs went through the crowd of Marines. Sakazuki's face hardened. "So, you have come, blasphemer," Sakazuki growled. "You have chosen to accept justice." "I've come to put an end to this," Naruto replied, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the base. "Let the people of Dressrosa go. They will be let go when your head is on a spike," Sakazuki snarled, his arm beginning to bubble and drip with magma. "You have no power to make demands here." "Don't I?" Naruto asked. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. And the world began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sky. The sea. The very air. A wave of pure, untamed nature energy, 1,000 times more potent than what he had ever drawn before, began to converge on G1 from all over the world. The ocean around the base began to churn. The clouds began to swirl into a massive vortex. It was as if the planet itself was answering his call. Sakazuki and the other admirals stumbled, their eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't a technique. Naruto was drawing on the life force of the entire world. "You wanted to see my power, Sakazuki," Naruto said, his eyes snapping open. They were glowing with a pure, white light. He was no longer just in sage mode. He was embodying it. "You wanted to put me in a cage. But you made a mistake. You brought me to the one place where my power is absolute. You brought me to the sea. You brought me to the sky. You brought me to the heart of nature itself." He raised a hand. A colossal waterspout, a living tsunami, rose from the ocean and wrapped around the G1 base, trapping the marine fleet in a churning prison of water. He raised his other hand. The sky darkened, and lightning, thick as the ancient trees on Amazon Lily, began to crackle between the clouds, aimed like 1,000 spears at the assembled army. "I am Naruto Uzumaki," he declared, his voice now booming with the power of the storm, the power of the ocean, the power of the very planet. "And I am giving you one chance. Stand down. Disarm your weapons. And surrender to me." Sakazuki, his face contorted with pure rage, refused to be intimidated. "Never. I am absolute justice." He launched himself at Naruto, a meteor of pure magma. At the same time, the floating fortress over Dressrosa began to glow, its main weapon charging, aimed at the terrified city. Naruto didn't even look at Sakazuki. He met his charge with a single, open palm. A miniature sun of pure sage energy flared to life in his hand. The magma fist of absolute justice met the hand of the sage of 6 paths. There was no explosion. Just a blinding white light. When it faded, Sakazuki was on his knees, his magma arm shattered, his body smoking, his eyes wide with the horror of his own power being utterly, completely overwhelmed. At the same instant, Naruto glanced at the broadcast screen showing Dressrosa. He thrust his other hand towards it. Miles away, a colossal hand made of pure, golden chakra, a hand the size of an island, descended from the heavens. It didn't smash the weapon. It gently, carefully, enclosed the entire floating fortress, plucking it from the sky as a child would pick a dandelion. The weapon fired its payload, a blast of annihilating energy, which dissipated harmlessly inside the chakra hand. The world watched, their minds broken. They were witnessing not an execution, but an ascension. Then, the signal was sent. On the horizon, a fleet appeared. A grand armada, led by the perfume Yuda. On its prow stood Boa Hancock, her eyes blazing with pride and love. Flanking her were the ships of the Revolutionary Army, with Sabo at the helm, and the Moby Dick II, with Marco the Phoenix wreathed in blue flame on its deck. An army of the world's disenfranchised, its rebels, and its dreamers, had answered the call. Naruto lowered his hands. The storm abated. The waterspout receded. The Marines, seeing their strongest leader defeated, their ultimate weapon neutralized, and a grand enemy fleet on the horizon, dropped their weapons. They had not been beaten by an army. They had been defeated by a single man who commanded the world itself. Naruto walked to the edge of the platform and looked out at the assembled forces of the world government. Today is not an end, he proclaimed, his voice carrying a new, undeniable authority. It is a beginning. The age of cruel gods and absolute justice is over. Today marks a new era. An era of understanding. An era of freedom. He turned and offered a hand to the defeated Sakazuki. An era where even you can have a second chance. The fleet admiral stared at the offered hand, his mind shattered, unable to comprehend the mercy being shown to him in his moment of ultimate defeat. From her ship, Hancock watched, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. He had done it. He had faced down the entire world and won, not through destruction, but through an overwhelming display of protective power. He hadn't just saved the day. He had changed the world's heart. The sun was beginning to rise, its first rays catching the golden flecks in his hair. He stood there, not as a criminal, not as a pirate, but as a beacon of hope for a world shrouded in darkness. He was her fool, her savior, her love. He was the Emperor of Amazon Lily. He was the Emperor of the Dawn. In the deepest, darkest chamber of the crumbling Pangea castle, the silhouetted figure of Imu stood before the dying god tree. On a table beside it, a map of the world was laid out. The island of Dressrosa was safe. The G1 base was now a symbol of rebellion. And the island of Amazon Lily shone like a defiant, newborn star. The ancient, eternal routine had been broken. The garden was overrun. The game had been lost. A low, guttural sound, the first sound the being had made in centuries, echoed in the chamber. It was a sound of pure, undiluted hatred. A sound of a god whose divinity had been challenged and found wanting. Imu's ancient eye, a swirling ringed pattern of terrifying power, snapped open. It gazed upon the map, its focus singularly on the shining light of Amazon Lily. The real game, the war between the false god of order and the true god of freedom, had just begun. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.